And we are now recording.
Hi, I'm here with Robin Hanson and Ronny Fernandez. I had posted on Twitter a few weeks ago about trying to set up conversations between people who probably disagree about a bunch of things in AI. And they both said they were interested in that. Robin has been thinking about AI scenarios for decades, and Ronny has been thinking about them for about a decade. Our hope here is to go slowly and methodically. I think they're both pretty eager to try to find common ground and cruxes and understand each other's perspective. And yeah, I think we all also think that these conversations about AI are a lot less boring if people try to understand what's going on with the people that disagree with them. So if you guys want to start off by giving your general framings for how you think about this, I think that would work well.
Nice to meet you, Divia and Ronny. I'd like
to talk. Sorry.
I'd like to suggest the framing of first asking, what would the future be like without AI, and what is our attitude toward future change, ignoring AI, and then ask how AI changes that story. So in particular, human values, at least expressed in our behavior, have changed greatly over the millennia and millions of years even. And so far, even though we try to pass on culture to our children, culture changes a lot across generations. And if you model that as some sort of a random walk based on random new environments that demand new adaptations, then we might just think this random walk will continue on for a long time. And then our default would be that our descendants would just have very different values from ours. And the question is that okay? That is, on one hand, we could say we should just accept the future being the relation to us that our ancestors accepted for us. That's one position. Another position could be that's unacceptable. We must not allow the future change as much as the past has changed. Or a third one could be it's acceptable if it takes a long time, but not if it takes a short time. And as there are reasons to think change might accelerate, then we should slow down the change, at least, so that it no longer gets in our faces. With respect to those stances in general, we might think then that AI makes it more likely perhaps that our descendants are different, or increases the rate at which the random walk changes, or maybe increases the speed at which the future just comes. Or is there some other reason to be especially concerned about AI relative to this background of just apparently values have changed and apparently they will continue to change, and is that acceptable? So that's my suggested framing for thinking about AI risk.
Cool. Yeah. And I think I'm basically happy to take that frame for now and try to find out if we can anchor on something from this model. Yeah, so I'm just going to go for it, I think. So I think the first thing I disagree with is just that we can actually model it as a random walk. I guess I tend to think of there being some form of progress in, or like some sort of trajectory in like how we are, what values we end up with. So I don't think that in the mirror world where we ended up with, continuing slavery, everyone was around just, in this mirror world, I don't think we end up with people just being like, well, thank God we got rid of those slavery abolitionists. They were so backwards. It seems like there's some sort of enduring algorithm that we're using for figuring out how to change our values. And I'm more worried about this kind of algorithm stopping, or whatever the trajectory is, whatever's causing the trajectory. I'm more worried about that stopping. And so I guess I'm basically just not, I guess I basically just disagree that it's a random walk.
So let me generalize my model to include a random walk plus some, predictable component. But
Sure.
then we might ask, so we might think of the predictable component as the result of, say, improving a set of moral tools we have, or going into more detail in moral arguments. And then we might think that sort of thing is a progress that results naturally from our increasing abilities and increasing scale of civilization. But then we might wonder why do we think that will continue into the future as it has in the past without AI, say, or just in general? And then how would we think AI would change the nature of that process? That is, what, presumably we would teach AI our moral tools, we would teach AI our ability to do moral arguments. And then if the world was getting better at those things and AI shows up, it would get better at those things too. So it wouldn't obviously be a problem.
Right.
So this, I'm happy to extend this framework to include this issue, but then I can still ask the same question.
Sure.
What was there going to be a problem in general? And does AI change the problem?
Yeah. So I guess, so the model, okay, what I'm currently imagining is like, sure, let's say it's a random walk with like a disposition, but if that's the case, I want to model it as being very high dimensional. And part of what I'm worried about is just that the dispositions that we end up with, actually, the main thing I'm worried about, if this weren't true, I wouldn't be worried. That the dispositions we end up with just aren't the same. Like they might be going in opposite directions. And
the same as we have now, you mean?
Yes, something like that. Or that we've had historically. Yeah.
But again, if we model the past as a random walk plus some trends, then which of those are you worried about in the future? The trend or the random walk?
Oh, I'm not worried. The trend plus the random walk seems fine. If anything, let's remove the randomness a little bit and just have more of the trend. That seems good. But what I'm worried about is the trend stopping. So I'm not worried about it just continuing.
So why would the past trend stop? What is the theory by which things have changed, are about to change?
Right. So I think that the trend is caused in part, or it's necessary for the trend to continue, that we have some enduring basic values in humans, like at least that we are responsive to arguments in the same sort of way. We're motivated by kind of similar-ish things, and that AI systems will have very, very different values and plausibly arbitrarily different values, and will just not be motivated by arguments. So will not be motivated by the kinds of arguments that we are motivated by. So like, for instance, someone can give me
But we're setting aside AI, just ignoring AI. Are you just generically concerned that our future descendants would have this problem?
I think there's some chance of this happening without AI, but I think in general, it's much less likely or something without AI.
So what I'm hearing is basically a core non-core argument that humans all so far have shared some core, and that the changes we've seen have all been outside the core. And you have a differential concern by things inside the core versus outside. You see the random walk and the drift as outside the core, and you're happy to let that continue, but you're worried that the core will change.
I'm worried about the drift changing. So like,
but you think the drift is the result of the core. That is, you have a model in your mind whereby the type of drift we have is because of the type of core we have.
Right.
And if the core changes, therefore the drift will change. And so this is a essentialist sort of argument. That is, there's some key essence that so far has been preserved and that you see threatened in the future. It's possible, you would say, that the humans as the future would change this essence, but less likely. But you think it's more likely that AIs would change this essence. Yeah,
or wouldn't have it in the first place. Right.
So now it's hard to evaluate this argument because by your claims, everything we've seen hasn't touched the core. We've never even seen this core. We couldn't name it. We don't know what it is, but it's there and we might risk touching it.
Wait a minute. Okay. I would also think, though, that Ronny, you probably have some sense of like I don't know, whether different animals share it or something like that. Maybe is a
Some
starting point.
sense seems tough. Some sense. I mean, I don't know. I
Okay.
have guesses. Would be the best I could do. But yeah, I mean, yeah. So I guess I think that, I mean, I can give you some examples of things that like I think are arguments that we would find motivating, and AI has no particular reason to find motivating. Arguments like, imagine how you would feel if that happened to you. Or, but if you did that, there would be suffering. And suffering is bad, so don't do that. So I think the reasons we find these motivating are like very particularly related to humans being humans. I also think they're in part related to being in the culture that we're in. But to take an outlandish example, a like AI maximizing, a paperclip maximizing AI would not find these motivating. I would say to it, hey, if you did this, there would be a bunch of suffering in the world. And it'll be like, interesting. What does that have to do with paperclips? And the paperclip example is like, you know, very improbable because it's a very particular goal. But I think it captures the possible, like the alienness of the goal, I think is right. I think that's like that's like the average alienness we should expect of goals that we're going to end up seeing in very intelligent systems. So I don't know. I mean, one way that I think about this sometimes is like, so Robin, in my model of you, you're like excited for or you would like to see a cool future with like a really big civilization engaging in like projects that are really awesome and trading goods that are really awesome. And stuff that we can't even imagine, engaging in projects we can't even imagine, in you know, trading goods that we can't even imagine, doing all sorts of really crazy things in institutions that make no sense to us. And I also think this would be a cool world. I would be happy about this world. And I totally grant that the inhabitants of such a world will very likely have very, very different values from us and find very different kinds of things motivating from us. But I kind of feel like there's like some sort of gate within which their values fall in like value space, such that like, I don't know, when you go outside of that gate is what I'm worried about.
So there's a literature of bioconservatives who have discussed genetic engineering of humans.
Right.
You might be aware of that is in a philosophy literature.
Yeah.
And that literature often goes of the form, there's certain human essences that must not be changed.
Right.
And other things okay to change. And it's very important that we pass laws and prevent anyone from changing human essences, because then non-essential humans or descendants might compete with us and the world might become non-essentially human.
Right.
But they at least will list some specific features of what they consider to be essentially human.
Sure.
I don't know whether you embrace those features, but
I do not. No.
But then we're left with this ambiguous essence.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, look,
right?
I can say some things about like, I mean, I'm not exactly sure. I can't exactly tell you what worlds I'd be happy with and what worlds I wouldn't be happy with. But some worlds I mean, here are some features that if they're missing, I think we definitely screwed up. And I think they might be missing. There's like, you know, a bunch of clearly different minds, and they do things like really liking each other, and they do things like having fun, and they do things like wondering and marveling, and they feel things like awe. If we have those things going on, I think I'm probably pretty happy. And I think, yeah, and the default outcome I expect does not have the things like that going on.
I mean, I actually think those things have actually changed in the last million years of your ancestors. Those are not things that have stayed common for the last million years. So if those are part of your essence, then you can't stick with the story. The essence has always stayed constant, and I'm worried it might change. You need to say, we drifted into the essence recently, and I don't want to drift out again.
Okay, well, yeah, so suppose that turns out true.
Wait, sorry. I want to, can you say which parts you mean? Like that a million years ago, people weren't having fun, people weren't wondering?
I think maybe the sacred of awe was not a thing a million years ago. I think maybe we have invented the sacred since then. I mean, fun has been true for 100 million
Long
years.
time.
That is
Yeah, fun seems old.
right, but then it also makes you less worried that it would go away. So many of these features we
Well,
have.
I think it makes you less worried that it would go away. I don't know that it makes, I guess it's not clear to me it makes Ronny less worried that it would go away, the fun part.
Yeah, it doesn't.
So let's at least list reasons why we might not things would go away.
Wait. I'm sorry, real quick. I just want to address the thing you were saying real quick. So let's say it turns out that like, oh, I'm wrong. This core thing that I care about, it's actually very new. It only started 100 years ago. Then I would say, oh, well, never mind. I guess I was wrong. You're right. What I am worried about is maintaining our control over the universe, or the control of something like our values over the universe. That's my guess is that that's not right, but it wouldn't change my mind if I found out like actually all these things I care about are very young.
But I mean, for example, slavery is in fact a relatively recent taboo. So if you want to pick anti-slavery as part of your essential package, then you can't be appealing to a long time scale.
Sure.
Stability about that. Then it has to be more about some recent change that you don't want to change again.
Sure. I guess on the model that I was using before, there was something like, I don't know, I kind of imagined that like humans 2000 years ago, even if, they hadn't put together the dots, they kind of had values that like, if they put them together and like they heard some arguments, they would be like, oh, I guess you're right. I guess it does. I'm being inconsistent when I like have slaves. But maybe there wasn't. And in that case, I'd just be like, okay, well, whatever. I still don't want slaves in the future.
I mean, I think that is in fact true that you could not have convinced people 2000 years ago to reject slavery.
Okay, fair enough.
I mean, people did try.
I think I want to make a distinction between whether someone could have convinced somebody at the time and whether it was sort of overdetermined that with more resources available, they would eventually come to that conclusion as a civilization.
Yeah, that's not gonna help me out or something. Like if the difference was for them, if they had more resources, then they wouldn't have been in favor of slavery. That's not going to help me out. I want it to be such that, like, I don't know, if they did a bunch more thinking or something.
Yeah, I guess I was lumping that as a type of resource. But to me, even the more thinking seems, in theory, separable from, like, could someone have convinced them in a reasonable amount of time at the time?
Sure, but either way, I'm like, look, I'm happy to grant it. Let's suppose it's everything I care about is very new. I'm like, okay, in that case, I just want to make sure that the stuff I really care about sticks around.
It's just certainly if we take 100 million year time scale, then many of these things won't have been true 100 million years ago. So there's just some time scale for each one with respect to how long it's been around. We could agree on that.
Sure.
And then the farther we look into the future, that maybe the more likely each of those things might be to go away. So if you're talking about, say, a billion or trillion year future, now I might get you to more accept the default that most of the things that you value now would plausibly go away with or without AI. It's not an AI question. It's just in the long run, you just might expect a lot of change.
Yep. Seems probable. Yep.
So, I mean, that's a substantial, once we agree on that, then I think we can make progress here, because now we could say, for example, you might think just generically, you were never going to be that happy with change uncontrolled.
Well,
the natural change that happens without coordination to prevent it would just not be to your liking, because in the long run, you just would not like where it typically would go.
I think that's right. I still want to be clear that I'm like being pretty liberal about what I'm going to be happy with. Like, as long as there's some fun and some wondering and some different minds that like might care about each other or something.
So those are three things. How long do you think the list is? Is it 30, 300, 3000?
Just listed three things. Yeah, it's actually quite long.
So
it's
300,
quite complicated. Quite complicated. Yeah.
Okay, so there's a list of 300 things. As long as all 300 things are there, you like the future. But if we only have 200 out of them, then the value is really low. We only have 20 out of them.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm like worried about it being adversarially selected. I'm imagining I tell you like 299, and then you make the last one just really bad, and then I'm
Well,
like,
we're just trying to
we're
estimate
screwed.
where
Yeah.
your drift plus random walk is likely to go in the long run, and ask what's
Right.
the chance that you'll be happy with where it would go without some sort of intervention. That's the
Right.
model we're taking
Right.
here. Again, we're
Right.
just trying to set aside AI temporarily and just talk
Ooh,
in general
yeah.
about long-term change and
Yeah,
say,
yeah.
where
Right.
did we think long-term change was going to go?
Right.
And was it going to be okay by this criteria or not?
Right. Right.
So for
I
example,
also,
go ahead.
I don't know. I guess to me, it seems different if people are talking about, therefore you want to control the future. Like, I think there's a coherent position where I'm like, no, I don't want to control the future now, but I'm kind of hoping at some point somebody else is like, well, that's too much.
Okay,
I want to control it at that point.
Okay, sure. I didn't mean to speak, to when you would do it, but just the idea that you wouldn't like the default. So at some point, somebody needs to do something to change this from the default.
Yeah, that seems right. Yeah, I do not want all the things I care about to stop existing. No.
And you think the things you care about are somewhat random with respect to where the future is going. That is, the future will just have this random walk and randomly drop various of them in random directions, which are hard to predict.
Oh, over 1 billion years, yeah, seems right.
And a trillion
Especially
even more
without
likely,
AI.
right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Okay. So now I think we can say that you are, as Divya said, you are hoping or expecting that at some point somebody needs to do something about this.
Yep.
And therefore prevent this default scenario.
Yep.
And how concerned does that depend on the rate at which this happened? Are you just okay with it if it just happens a really long time, or is it mainly the worry that would happen fast?
Yeah, I think I'm okay if it happens fast. Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry. What's
Wait, are we
happening?
talking about, is the bad thing is happening fast, or if just change at all is happening?
Well, the point is change typically leads to the bad thing eventually, but what if
Okay,
it
but I
happens
think-
faster?
Okay, but I thought Ronnie's view was that change often leads to a better thing in the short term, because there's some element of moral progress, but then in the long term.
Let me be just more specific. What I would
Okay.
like is intergalactic civilizations of really awesome minds doing really cool stuff that I can't imagine, with things like fun and wondering and like, I don't know, I can't give you an exact definition of what the worlds I like and what the worlds I don't like are. But yes, I want there to be like a big intergalactic civilization doing all sorts of crazy cool shit. That's what I want to make sure happens. And I'm like, yeah.
Okay, but
yeah,
it seems to me your model of change says that the distribution over outcomes basically slowly gets worse over time. I don't see a gets better then gets worse out of this model. This looks like, maybe it's a long tail distribution. Maybe the median tends to get better, but the average tends to get worse. But then in the long run,
And this is conditional on no AI?
yes, or just not conditional on no AI, just not conditioning on AI. We're just talking in general about the future, not talking specifically about AI.
Well, basically, I also don't think we get the awesome future I want without AI. So yes.
But still, I mean, the
yeah.
processes you're talking about, on the one hand, you like growth, right? The expansion, the total number of everything, that would be good. And the increase in capacities you like. But then you see this moral drift, whereby this list of 300 things, slowly items drop out of the list. And you don't like that. And it looks like the expected combination of growth plus this on net is bad for you. That is a vast future, which, most of which only has 50 items out of the list of 300, you don't think is very good. And
I mean, I don't know.
On net, this doesn't look good to you.
I mean, I don't know. It depends how we're carving up the items, like, yeah, I don't know. I mean,
but this is a key point here. Like, if you thought the future would be so vast and big, there'd be all these different parts of it, and some of them would keep 300 items on the list, and that would outweigh all the rest, then you could be pretty happy with this long-term future, right?
Yeah. I mean, that seems okay.
Yes. Also, Ronnie, I don't know if this is right, is that you maybe would think that in some types of futures that you could sort of imagine things that you would like could get added to the list.
Sure. And also things that I currently like might like rightly drop off. So yeah, I totally think it's possible that there's things I like now, and then if you let me do a bunch more thinking, I would find out, oh, I shouldn't like these things. I'm being inconsistent in some way, and actually they're terrible. For instance, I eat meat. Wouldn't be terribly surprised if it turned out that this is something that I'm like being very inconsistent about.
Okay, but the bottom line here is we have multiple processes, some of which are making the future better, some of which are making it worse.
Mhm.
And we need an overall judgment about the net effect of all these factors in our
Yep,
typical
I
future, where
see.
we don't condition on AI or anything else specific, just what did we generically think was going to happen in the future? That's
Right,
the
right.
place I want to start with as a reference point, and then we can talk about AI compared to that.
Yeah. So I think if you just run it forward, I think we end up I don't, yeah.
Every year,
I see
like
that
the
this,
economy,
okay.
every 10 year, 15 years, the world economy doubles, but we drop one item from the list of 300, or maybe we drop two and we add one for a net
Yeah.
drop of two. And
Yeah.
now over
Yeah.
the long run, things grow, but we end up with a shorter and shorter list, and you're less and less happy with that. And so that's the
Yep.
typical future.
Yeah.
So this is a typical future bad analysis, but that I'm not saying that's wrong, but I just wanted to have a reference point in our mind, because
Yeah.
it'll get even harder to think about AI. So this
Yeah.
should be an easier analysis to do in some sense than what we're about to do when we add AI.
Sure. I've thought a lot less about it though. So yeah, so I definitely see how this model says typical future bad. I also don't think that that's what I thought. So
And hence my reason for introducing it here.
yeah.
Because I think,
right.
I mean, just to foreshadow, I think many of the things people are worried about AI, they're just really worried about the future in general, and they haven't quite realized that.
Right. I mean, so I'm happy with that if that turns out to be the case. That doesn't.
We don't have to
change
settle it here, at least,
Yeah,
but I
right.
just wanted to give you a chance to
Cool.
state a conclusion if you have one.
Yeah.
And Divya, if you have a statement
I
of this
guess-
value, I'm happy to hear yours.
Yeah, I'll let Ronny go first, but I do have thoughts.
I guess I still think that it seems like if we don't get AI and we don't get wiped out some other way, I guess I still expect future humans to be pretty cool. Or like I expect that if I looked at the civilization 200,000 years from now, I would look at it and I would think, man, this is pretty cool what they're doing.
But they might not be humans anymore.
Uh,
They could have undergone enormous number of modifications of various sorts, and you might not
Like-
want to call them humans anymore. So
Sure.
I didn't know if that's doing any work for you to assume they're still humans.
No, they don't have to be. I mean, they could be biologically modified. They could be much
And then
smarter.
from this list
Yeah.
of 300, the median, how many of those 300 are still saved?
Yeah.
Say 100,000 years ago, a million, a billion, a trillion.
Yeah. I mean, at a billion, I'm just expecting that we're all dead or something, right?
Well, I wouldn't, but I would expect there be a vast universe full of stuff. It just might not be stuff you like. I don't know. That's the question here.
Right.
What were you thinking?
Yeah, I was going to ask about that too, because when I think super far in the future, I think a lot of my, well, maybe nothing is going to be there that I like comes from, I don't know, there could be new existential risks in a trillion years from now. It seems entirely possible that there are these sort of very destructive events that, I don't know, like if everything were some black hole, that seems kind of bad to me. That has zero, unless I don't really claim to understand black holes, but
Right.
my guess is that has zero of the things on my list.
Yeah, that seems right.
And so I think that a lot of my sense of like, yeah, I'm not counting on the trillion years from now is specifically coming from those scenarios, and not like there's some civilization, but it's just so alien I wouldn't be able to appreciate it.
Well, we could combine this and imagine the future trajectory as some steady drift plus a few catastrophic events. And you could put substantial weight on, things getting bad, also on rare catastrophic events, but they would still have the same overall trajectory where things are getting worse. And you might
I don't think I agree with that. I think things are probably not going to get worse. I think they'll get more alien to me, but I don't want to call them worse.
Well, that's the key question. But he wants to say he has these list of 300 things. And if we lose that list, that's getting worse. You don't have to say that, right? You could say, I'm much more forgiving.
Yeah, I do think the catastrophe thing is worse. And I think, and I would hope that my, whoever is around then will try to prevent everything becomes a black hole type scenario. But
yeah, if we end up with no love, yep, I'm pretty sure I don't like that world.
So
I think for me, it depends if it's part of some process that I kind of trust, because if I imagine something where the beings at the time really thought about it and they were like, yeah, we're going to kind of change this to something that seems better than love to us, but we understood love. Like maybe that's a little idealized, but that's an idealized scenario where I'm like, I'm inclined to trust that.
Yeah, there could be a process that I trusted enough that it would say, never mind, let's not do love, let's do this other thing. And I'm like,
Right.
okay, if you guys say so. And you know, if I trust, you know, if I spin off a simulated Ronny and, you know, it goes and gets all the arguments and such, and it's convinced, yep, never mind, we shouldn't be doing the love thing, we'll do this other thing, then maybe I could buy it. But yeah.
So let me plant another flag, which is just, we have a lot of theory in evolutionary psychology and biology of ways some kinds of morals would be in evolutionary equilibrium, and that this is often part of our explanations for where our morals come from. So we might have more reason to expect those things to continue because they have some structural reason for existing, even though that usually gives a space of possibilities, and you might be concerned about where we sit within that space. So for example, evolutionary psychology or evolution doesn't prohibit slavery. It can allow for slavery within those analyses. Sure. And you might think, no, I want the one without slavery. Yep. But we could still at least, I mean, the question is, how many of these 300 could we attribute to, you know, the more fundamental causes, such that you shouldn't be so worried about them going away because there are these structural forces that put them there and would maintain them.
Right. Yeah, that'd be great. That'd be real lucky.
But it might not be all 300, but it might be
right.
100 out
right.
of the 300 or 200 out of the 300.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I'm like pretty happy to say that there was definitely some chance that all the stuff I cared about would go away, and that we would still get a bunch of growth. So without everyone going extinct, or without like civilization minds, there being no intelligences, there was definitely some chance that all the stuff I cared about would be stuff that the future intelligences wouldn't care about, even without AI. But I think it's like differentially more likely to happen with AI than without. Yeah.
So before we start on AI, let me just make one last comment, which is, if you thought the typical future was a negative trajectory,
yeah,
then you might not want future evolution to follow the same processes as past evolution. You
right.
might think we got lucky enough so far, but we need to change the evolutionary process. And for example, maybe shut down change if we could coordinate to do that. And then we would lose the vast future we might hope to get, but at least we won't lose the things we most value because we're going to prevent change.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people have that basic intuition. Once you show them just how strange the future could be, they kind of don't want us to roll those dice. They want to stick with roughly what we have. And that's, I mean, actually something I'm very concerned that civilization may choose to do in the next few millennia. We might just want to be aware enough of this issue and decide to stop change.
Yep, that seems right to me. For what it's worth, I also think that would be really sad. Yeah, I mean, look, if you modeled me as just like wanting one thing, which is a really big intergalactic civilization, that when I look at it, I'm like, well, this is pretty cool, as opposed to I look at it and I'm like, this is completely boring, or this might as well not be any minds at all. That seems fine. As long as I don't look at it and I'm like, and I'm basically like, well, there might as well not have been any minds at all. This is entirely boring. I think that's probably good.
Right, but our mechanism here was more specific. That is, if we imagine that the process of change as being this random walk plus this, drift, and then we think of this core versus non-core concept of it, our essentials, then the model here is that so far, luckily, we haven't messed with our essentials. I don't know why exactly you would think that, but somehow you think the essentials didn't get messed with. And then, but the future evolution threatens to cut out these essentials. And that's why change needs to stop. And
I
that's,
don't mind either way, to be clear. If it turns out that all the things that I'm considering essentials happened in the last 100 years, I don't care. I'm like, still either way, I want to make sure that they keep going.
but right, that makes the argument all the stronger. You know, we got lucky to suddenly get all the essentials, and
Sure.
then we would be, you know, the most likely thing to happen is they would just drift away. So let's stop change to prevent the essentials from drifting away.
I mean, it's also important to me that like we keep doing things like moral philosophy or whatever sort of thing it is that like gets me to sometimes change my mind about what I like.
So in some sense, there's this, you know, non-random walk process that you embrace. So in some sense, you like wherever that goes,
Right.
as long as it's based on the essentials. That is, if the essentials go away, you don't trust that process anymore, but you do
That's
trust
exactly
it if
right.
the essentials remain.
That's exactly right.
Right. Okay. But still, that makes you risk averse with respect to evolution, just taking away the essentials, which makes you say, well, let's not allow change that could threaten the essentials.
Sure. Yeah, that seems right.
And
I mean, I could make some
you can see how
trade-offs.
it's pretty close to the bioconservatives' position, even if it's not agreeing in the specifics, right?
I mean, I'd be happy to make some trade-offs, you know, like half as much love for 15 times as much fun or something. But
Right.
yeah, sure. I mean,
So just to be clear, I do not have this list of 300 essentials.
I think you do.
My values on humans will not put as much of a priority on their maintaining love or fun or the sacred or other things like that. I'm okay with those evolving away if the people at the time choose that. And as long as they have other things they do want, and sort of want them in a similar way, at least, I will be more okay with that. So there might be essentials I have there, but it's going to be a much shorter list. It might be 3 instead of 300.
And just to be clear, you also don't like some black hole scenario, right? This seems like you would, there was some way to prevent it.
Well,
you're
just
interested in.
death, I wouldn't like, just extinction.
Extinction, yeah.
Everything
So
dying.
you agree
would
there's
be-
something called extinction and you don't want that.
Right. So life is
Point
better
of
than
agreement.
death is I would certainly give. So something by, you know, a scenario by which our civilization dies and everything dies, then that looks pretty bad.
Right.
Cool.
But you have a pretty broad, like within, other than that, you have a pretty broad definition of life. I'm guessing also that like, if there were life, but it was all bacteria type life and no human type life, there's something about that seems worse to you.
I mean, I like thought
You like
or
thought, right?
minds,
Yeah, totally.
minds.
Right.
So I would be disappointed if minds went away.
Yeah.
But I don't see great risk of that. I mean, the AI argument is sort of the argument that minds are very powerful and that they will expand and become much more of a thing. So with respect to AI risk, losing minds isn't really, you know, that big an issue.
Yep, that seems right. So, Robin, I'm modeling you somewhat right now as like a preference utilitarian or something like that. So basically, as long as there's some things around that are minds and they have some wants, some preferences, and they, you know, execute some plans, come up with some plans to get more of the stuff they want, you're happy with this. And like maybe the more of the stuff that they want, the better. The more of the stuff that they want that they get, the better.
I mean, I'm okay with you putting that as a placeholder. I mean,
Okay.
I have a more complicated view that we could explain if we went into it, but I don't think it's necessary here. So
Cool.
I don't think the difference will matter that much for our conversation. If it does, I will try to revise.
Cool. Sounds good. Yeah. So
Okay,
yeah,
so
I
now
guess I just want to give you some like obvious counterexamples, which are like, for instance, there's a giant intergalactic civilization, lots of individual minds. They're all pretty much copies of each other, and they're all only interested in minimizing prediction error. So, you know, they'd be happiest if they could like make sure that all of the cameras, all of the sensors will forever say 0. And that's all that's ever going to happen for, you know, they do some planning to like make sure that there's zeros forever. Does this seem as good to you as a civilization that's like trading goods and like coming up with new plans and making?
I just don't want to be trying to come up with my optimization function over the future. I'm going to try to be robust about my arguments such that I can just find particular things to rely on that don't rely on some complicated structure like that. I'm trying to avoid producing such a thing.
But
and we'll see how far successful I could be.
it is bad though, right? Like this would be a bad future, right? You wouldn't like this, right?
I mean, it depends on all the things they do to make those markers get to zero. So, I mean, I think we, in essence, are, optimizing some pretty simple-minded thing, but it's all the complications of how we do it that gives value to us, not so much the thing we're optimizing. In some sense, we're optimizing for evolutionary fitness, which you could think of as a simple number that's boring, but we do it in complicated, glorious ways. So I'm not so sure I can evaluate it based on this description of the thing they're optimizing. I want to know how they do it.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, okay. They,
if they do it by being dead,
I mean, sure.
that's
sure.
one light way. There's some optimization function, whereas the optimal way to achieve it is for everybody to be dead. I'm not so happy with that one.
Right.
Okay, so I'm not sure that this is like this is an attempt to point out what might be a point of disagreement. Robin, I think that you think that if something is trying hard to achieve something, even if its terminal value is pretty simple, it will sort of recreate a bunch of instrumental values that seem kind of cool in the way that the things that humans might want to describe as their terminal values would say are cool.
They might. I can't exclude that. So I'm not going to make strong claims on that basis.
You don't think it's okay? I guess I thought that if they're not, I still think that you think that that's like a pretty strong attractor, that there's maybe an attractor that's like being dead and there's a attractor that's like a bunch of cool, complicated stuff happens. Is that wrong?
Well, I mean, I think in a large, complicated universe that is in a huge economy or a huge society with enormous scope and many parts, that the parts will be doing somewhat complicated things to achieve that total thing. You will have to coordinate with many other parts and talk with many other parts and be aware of many other parts. That is just generically a complicated world will induce complicated minds and complicated strategies to perform there.
Right. And I think that insofar as like you want to, I don't know, claim something as your values, it's something like valuing things on that level, like the set that maybe, human morality and love and all that stuff is like part of some greater class of, I don't know, cool strategies that would naturally come across.
If it turns out to matter, then I'm happy to come back to this in the discussion, but I fear this is a bit more of a distraction. But like my official position is
might be right.
What I call dealism, wherein I'm trying to promote everybody getting more of what they want, and that includes people in the future. So my relationship to people in the future would be more to sort of make deals with them so that we could all do better by our own lights.
Yeah, makes sense.
Cool. Seems like you wanted to get to something else, Robin.
Well, we were putting off AI, but since this is advertised as discussing AI risk,
I'm
happy to say at this point, let's finally get to
I
AI.
will say, I could end up being wrong. That summary was because specifically I predict that it will be relevant to the AI part, which is perhaps a wrong prediction.
I see where you're coming from. Yeah, I guess I still want to try to give you maybe another counterexample. So there's a big economy, and every individual in this economy, trillions and trillions of minds, all basically copies of each other. And the only reason any of them do anything is to accumulate more paper clips in some particular part of the universe. I mean, regardless of how far-fetched this is, does this not seem like might as well not be a future? Like there's no experiences. I
can't imagine that what we're about to discuss will depend on my answer to that question. That just seems implausible. So I will set this up as saying, look, so far, our ancestors accepted a certain way the world changed, and we are sitting in a situation where plausibly that same sort of process will continue, but perhaps faster. I think you might consider having a higher ambition than our ancestors did to basically control change more than they did, but that seems pretty dangerous to me, actually. I see a lot of risks from trying to control change, and I think we're really don't have the governance and mechanisms that are up to that. And I think maybe we should just accept the same constraints our ancestors did and let the world continue the way they accepted the world continuing as perhaps the best we can do at the time, given how bad we would be at trying to control change.
Right. I see.
So that's my more fundamental position here is in terms of, yes, our descendants might be different and they might disagree with us about values, but they'll probably have a lot of things they value. And there's probably a lot of things that we would find similar with them and see resonance. And that's good enough.
Yeah. So
Because it's going to be really hard to actually do anything else but accept the past process by which change happened. And I really think there's huge things that can go wrong by trying to control this process. But
cool.
That's my overall position is just, but that's why I want to set up this comparison with ignoring AI in the past, because I want to highlight to what extent do you think AI is different than the default without AI? And to what extent are you proposing to do something different than our ancestors did with respect to our problems we face compared to the problems they faced?
Yep. So I do think we should try to do something different. I don't think that we should just give up the resources of the universe to whatever values happen to be there.
Do you think our ancestors should have done something different too? Did they make a mistake?
I mean, how recent ancestors?
Any
yes,
ancestors?
Yes.
Is there any period at which our ancestors should have tried to prevent change that happened? They, from their lights, they should have tried to lock down change and said, nope, no more.
I mean, I don't know about change in general, but I think it would have been great if there had been some sort of conspiracy to keep AI stuff secret, to keep deep learning secret. Yeah, I think that would
setting aside AI, all the other technologies that have ever appeared in the past, should somebody have tried to prevent the discovering of the new world, the steam engine? Should people have prevented the computer? Should they have prevented, So then in your mind, the changes that resulted from those are different than AI, right?
Yep.
Because
that seems right.
Because this process of just generically change, taking away from the list of 300, that was happening for the last 10,000 years.
Maybe if it was, then
I assure you it was. That is
okay. Well, that is. Look, there's this question of how old are the 300 things that I care about, and maybe they were around a long time, or maybe they weren't. Maybe they just started being around. Either way, the things that I care about are in fact the things that I care about.
Right, but if you could take our ancestors from 10,000 years ago and think of their list of 300, it's not equal to your list of 300.
Oh, I see what you're saying. You're saying should
by their values.
I see. I see. Yeah. I mean, suppose
should the ancient Egyptians have tried to lock down change and conquered their enemies and made sure new technologies didn't appear and new social movements didn't appear, so that new religions didn't appear, so that they could make sure their list of 300 things stayed.
I would have preferred that they didn't.
But from their point of view, do you think
from their point of view,
they made a mistake by allowing change?
It depends how well poised they were to do it, obviously, also, and how costly it would have been. But suppose that, I mean, certainly if they had a decent shot, they should have done it. Yeah, that seems right.
Okay, so
for the record, that doesn't seem clear to me, because I actually think there's something sort of predictable about that. Even those ancient Egyptian people might have liked the material abundance now more than their gods. I don't think they would have said that at the time if I asked them, but I guess I believe in some sort of but if they really knew.
Yeah, sure, but there's some sort of trade-off, right?
But unless there's been a change, then by that light, he should, prefer the material abundance of AI and give up on fun and love, right?
So I mean, from my perspective, there's the potential difference with AI. I don't know whether I think this is right or not, but I think I value some sort of continuity, and it seems like an open question for me whether AI would be continuous, though that's different.
So we can talk when we get into that what you mean by continuity, basically. Well, what is continuity?
Yeah, I mean,
exactly?
I'll just keep it very brief. I certainly don't think I have coherent thoughts about that, but I think I'm pretty cool. I think 5 years from now will be pretty great. But if you sort of replaced me with something that's sort of generically better, but it's then I find myself objecting, which I think is sort of a common thing. I don't know if it's coherent or not, but I stand by it for
let's see if we can reify that or make it more vivid as we get into this. Okay. But I just, but I am happy to note that basically, at least Ronny is basically saying the past should have prevented change if they could have done so at a low cost, because on average,
I mean,
change
sorry,
is bad, basically.
not change in general, right? There's lots of changes.
But any sort of changes that could possibly threaten the key 300 things.
Not that could possibly, that are very likely to. Or like, you know,
But most cultural change, maybe most tech and cultural
ones, right?
change did change those things. That is, you know.
Sure. I mean, here are some changes, like, you know, would I, if I were, so, okay, so we got the ancient Egyptians, they're sitting around and, you know, they have discovered a print, you know, they've discovered the printing press. I do think that they should be pretty wary about just like printing a bunch of stuff.
Right. So any technology
but I
that
don't
has a
think they should,
substantial
like,
risk of cultural impact would be something you would recommend they shut down if they could.
I
Oh,
don't.
wait,
I'm
you
not
said
sure.
be wary about, and then you said shut down if they could, which those don't seem the same yet.
Yeah, I think worry is much better than just literally shut it down. You know, I think you should like dip your toes in, try printing a few thousand things, see how it goes.
So there might be an intermediate thing that's even better, but between the two extremes of do nothing or completely shut down change is preferable to the other option, in your view, from their point of view. That is,
in the case of the printing press, I don't know. I mean, it's a very difficult empirical question, obviously.
I just mean averaging. That is, the key story is, if you think that from their point of view, they made a mistake in that the world, if it had not changed at all, would have been better for them than the world they actually appeared.
Right.
Then,
well, I mean, I don't want to take a position on yay change or boo change.
But that is the position you've taken here. That's the whole point. That's the argument we're trying to get into here.
I don't see how it's fully the position Ronny has taken.
I think we have more information about individual technologies than like it's a change or it's not a change.
Okay, so here's the candidate position I think you've taken.
Mhm.
That is, every generation has its 300 things
Mhm.
that are its essentials,
Mhm.
and that overall growth of civilization is less important overall than maintaining those 300 things. Typically, those 300 things get lost over time at a rate that's high enough that means the loss of that is more than the gain from other things, so that if it was just the stark choice between allowing the change that did happen versus not allowing any change to those 300 things, they would have preferred the not any change. That doesn't mean there isn't a third option, but they would have allowed a few changes, and that could be even better. But
yeah,
overall,
yes,
the package of all the changes that happen versus no change, they would prefer the no change, which I think is a pretty anti-change position.
Cool. Given the choice between we're locked on the planet, we're locked on Earth, and you know, we still have fun and love and awe and wonder in the universe, and we lose love, awe, wonder in the universe, but we get an intergalactic economy with no experiences in it and nothing that I value in it. Yes, I pick we're locked on Earth.
But you said no experiences in it?
Yeah. So there's no, you know, there's no like,
Yeah,
you know,
see, I do kind of want to keep moving on, but I guess I flagged this as an important thing that you said.
Yeah, I think it's important.
But I think what you're saying, Ronny, is you're picking a worst case and you're saying that case I don't like, but I want to focus more on the typical case, because that's what we're doing in the past, right? We say from the ancient Egyptians, there's the typical case, and I think we can pick the actual case as a typical case. I don't think we think the actual case was very atypical. That is, the actual case, they should have preferred no change to the actual change that happened. And the actual change was typical. So if the process still continues into the future, if it's the same sort of process, then we should also prefer the actual of no change to the typical actual change that's likely to occur in the future, averaging over technologies, averaging over this different tech scenarios, et cetera. Just generically, change is bad.
Sorry.
Unless we can find some way to make a compromise, like to get the better change and not get the worst ones. But if we take the whole package, it's bad.
When I average over technologies, right? Like, I assume my distribution over AI outcomes is very different than yours. So, I mean, I want to say not conditioning on we have super intelligences, or conditioning on we don't have super intelligences. Yeah, So
I mean, we didn't have superintelligence
yeah,
for the
I
last
just
10,000
don't think-
years, right?
I
So
just think
in
that
that
the rate-
period, it was still bad even without superintelligences.
yeah. So the rate at which things fall off, I imagine, might well be compensated for at given the rate that things grow.
But at least it's
But
close.
I'm not sure.
You're on the fence. I'm happy to just
I'm not sure.
note.
I'm not sure it's close. Yeah. Yeah,
But you're not sure. Let's at least
Mhm.
play that, right?
Yeah.
So
Sure.
let's just plant
Sure.
that flag, right? So the point
Sure.
is, when you look at our ancient Egyptians' choice between what actually happened and no change, from your point of view, they shouldn't be very sure allowing change was a good idea. And in fact, stopping change might have been a good idea. You're not very sure.
Well,
and therefore, when we look to the future, you're also not very sure.
No. Well, sure. I mean,
Even ignoring
over-
superintelligence, looking to the future, you go, that's a pretty tough trade-off. I'm not sure I like, the growth
Yeah,
in
I feel
trade
like I
for
want to
losing
get
stuff off the
make
list.
sure your answer on the Egyptians is solid. I don't feel sure that you've answered the question about the Egyptians. Maybe you did, but I didn't trust it for some reason.
yeah. So, I mean, it depends how similar the ancient Egyptians actually were to us, or would have been if they had more time to think. Like, I don't know. But like, I can imagine ancient Egyptians that were very conservative about their religion and very conservative about what were the things they really cared about. And I can imagine them looking at us and being like, these guys don't have the right reverence for the pharaohs at all, or whatever the ancient Egyptians thought.
Honestly, the ancient Egyptians are probably a lot more like us than the typical other human at the time.
Well, okay.
We take other humans besides the ancient Egyptians at the same time, they're going to like us even less.
Sure. So I'm like,
Egyptians had a civilization of sorts that was much more like us.
Sure. So I don't know. But like, I can definitely imagine ancient Egyptians that would look at us and say, "Oh man, that was a mistake." And if they would look at us and say that was a mistake, then maybe they should have done something about it.
Okay, but so now the analogous question, setting aside AI, just looking at a future, ignoring AI, we still have the same trade-off. That is, you see growth and the continuum of argument, and that's good, but you also see a drift process that could just take away the items off the list of 300 essential things. When you weigh those things and do you feel like rolling the dice? If you could have just a stop change option, would that be better than rolling the dice and seeing what happens?
If I condition on no AI, then no, I would probably, I think probably the growth is going to be like way better, and we'll probably still have fun and love and sex and stuff.
But aren't you? How much change are you assuming? I mean, I assume that even without AI, our descendants are going to change a whole lot. So
sure.
What time scale? So are we talking 1,000 years, a million, a billion, trillion? What time scale are you talking about when you are imagining they're going to change that much?
Over the course of tens of thousands of years, I'm imagining I'm probably going to be pretty happy. Over the course of 1 billion years, I have no idea.
Yes, you do. You just don't want to look at it. I mean, I think you do have an idea. I think you should expect huge change.
Sorry. Yeah, I should expect huge change.
You should expect this random walk to continue and this things to keep dropping off this list of 300. So I think you got to expect out of this 300, maybe you've got 30 in 1 billion years or 3.
Yeah, sure. In 1 billion years.
What do you think of that? That's the question. What do you think?
Seems bad.
Okay, wait. Sorry. This is not what you said, Ronnie. But I also think that you maybe value something like, I don't know, years of conscious experience of the stuff you like. And it does not seem obvious to me that if you say shut down all change, we're staying on the planet, you even get more years of the thing you like than in this other scenario where maybe you get it, but there's some drop off, but it's growing really fast. I don't know if that seems relevant to you. It seems relevant to me.
That's right. I mean, yeah, we might overall. Yeah, I mean, look, if we stop the change and we just stay on the planet, I mean, in 1 billion years, we're maybe still screwed, right? Like
there's certain types of change it seems unrealistic to talk about stopping, at least from my perspective. Like we said, the sun is still going to do what it's going to do, for example. So that to me puts a bound on like the possible value in the no change scenario.
That's right.
Note that our world is so large that there's a small fraction of ancient Egyptian fans in our world who might be comparable to the number of ancient Egyptian elites back then. And so from the purpose of saving what ancient Egyptians value, if there's just they just want some of that to continue. Maybe we have kept that continuing as a tiny fraction of our much larger world.
Sure.
Yeah, though
Yeah.
I think that seems a little cherry picked on the ancient Egyptian side. There are plenty of other ancient religions that didn't stick around, right?
Right. But that's relevant for your future. You want to say,
Sure.
well, sure, in a huge future, there'll be some part of it that does what you like. And well, that's not
Sure.
true for
That's not-
some
but-
things,
Yeah,
right?
it depends.
Yeah. Well, I find it plausible. Like if the two options are, yes, we decide, I don't know, what's the realistic thing here? Let's just say don't colonize other planets, something like that. So option one, we don't colonize any planets. I'm like, okay, probably in like a million years, things are pretty screwed and we only had one planet. Where if we do colonize other planets, things change faster, but we also get more time. I'm not sure which like integral is bigger. I don't know. We might very well overall get more of the stuff that I liked in like that space time than in the one where we locked onto planet. Even if, I'm not anti very different minds. I'm just very pro the minds that we have around.
So
So-
I'm happy with us just setting up the framing we have so far. I don't need you to be sure.
Sure.
But
Sure.
I just want us to see that
Cool.
in
Sounds
fact,
good.
there's a wariness from change, because even without AI, the default future will have a lot of losing of the list of 300 essentials.
Yep.
Even if on net it's okay,
Yep.
you're still a thing you lament there as a huge thing.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then if we move to AI, we can make comparisons. So now the question is,
sure.
when we talk about AI, what
Sure.
are the reasons to think that, how is AI different? Is it just a rate at which things change difference, or is there some other qualitative difference that matters once we add AI to the mix?
Yeah, I think there is a qualitative difference in that like we were talking before about like a disposition in the random walk. And I think that is very likely to just go in a totally different direction. And sure,
We need to say more about it. So let me
if you're-
start. I would like to just describe my default AI future, how it would play out. And
Mhm.
the question is, do you have a different default future? And that's why we might disagree, or do you just disagree with the consequences of the same default future? So I might say the default would be AI firms in our capitalist economy produce AIs, they sell them to customers to gain value. So their incentives are to make the sort of AIs their customers will find congenial and useful. And whenever an AI gets out of control, then they are the main ones who suffer, their customers and the firms, because people won't want to buy from that firm anymore. And the firms will be very much trying to evolve these AIs to be congenial to the customers and to fit into the human slots they're replacing, be it a lawyer or whatever else. So they will try to make these AIs look on the surface and act in most contexts, practical contexts, a lot like humans in terms of their style and values and habits. And then over time, the economy gets larger with these AIs. The AIs become more powerful. They perhaps own themselves. They own capital. They are, in the capitalist economy, having their own preferences and buying the things they want. If plausibly they are more productive than ordinary humans, perhaps even than M's, their fraction of wealth would grow. No one of them would dominate because there'd be thousands and millions of them, using the same sort of social structures we do, like law and contract and markets, to hold each other and, discipline each other and to watch out for each other. And therefore, eventually it's possible they might have a revolution or some sort of a civil war wherein one of the axes of that war could be AIs versus not. And in that possibility, they might steal, take the property of others or kill others. That's a thing that's always been possible in our society so far. Civil war, there's many possible dimensions of which it happened, but that's one of them. And then the issue is like how much more likely that is than any other civil war. And then over time, the ordinary human types people would lose more jobs. They'd retire, move to the margins of the world, spend their retirement wealth with a comfortable but marginal existence. That's roughly my default future of AI. So is it that you think that the future will be different than this, or that you dislike the consequences of the scenario I just described?
I think there's a fair, yeah. I'm happy to give that like, I don't know, some amount of probability between like 20 and 80%. I'm not exactly sure.
Okay, but there's some other scenario you want to highlight that's different from this scenario.
Yes, the other scenario that I want to highlight is like, basically they just got much more intel. There are ML systems, and they, you know, they also get integrated into the economy. And some systems become much smarter, much more quickly. We find systems that are like generally smarter than than humans.
But that's all consistent with the scenario I gave. So at what point are you deviating from the scenario I gave?
At the point that I'm deviating is that at some point very quickly there's basically a coup that's very quick and like is,
or civil war, if you like, in some sense.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine things to go much faster. Like
a civil war can go fast.
Sure.
But in terms of the kind of thing it is, it's
sure.
You know, in society, some coalition of parties decides that they're going to take over from the rest of society, exert force, and basically physically take over, and to some degree take the property from others or even kill others.
Robin, is there something you like about civil war better than coup? Like, does it seem more?
Well, a coup is just about the military taking over, right?
Oh, I see.
So
I see.
Got it.
So it's a specific version of a civil war.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Yeah. Right.
Right. But you can have other civil wars that aren't initiated by the military, right?
Sure. Yep. So exactly, a civil war on the planet, and I expect it to go fairly fast. And I think that this might happen before it's very obvious that like ML systems are like in the economy or something like that.
And can we say that most of your concern about AI scenarios versus non-AI scenarios is concentrated in these scenarios?
No, I don't think so. No.
So then should we list the other scenarios? Because we have to decide which scenarios to focus in on. If we spend all our time on this and then you say, but that wasn't my worry.
Let's just go with the original one that you painted out. That's fine.
You're concerned about that one too, you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay,
totally.
So what are you concerned about? I guess I want to take whatever is your scenario of most concern. So if that's
cool.
If that's a substantial scenario of concern, we can walk into that. But I would feel sad if at the end of this we didn't end up talking about the scenario you actually are most worried about.
Yeah, I think that that's fine. It might be the scenario I'm most worried about. I feel a little
try
unsure.
for 20 minutes or something and talk about it and see where we go.
Cool.
And like, are the things that you are worried about in that scenario ones that you expect to be pretty similar across scenarios you're worried about? Okay, then I think it's. I think that's the important part.
So pretty much fine.
Let's be clear. First, I had this peaceful transition scenario where basically some things like humans were had to retire and pushed to the side and weren't the center of attention, but it was peaceful. And then we had the civil war scenario. Which of these two scenarios is your bigger concern?
I mean, the civil war scenario seems worse in some ways.
But it might be a lower probability. So you have to weigh those two to tell me which you're more worried about.
I think the civil war scenario is higher probability.
And it's also a higher damage. So I guess that means it's the scenario you're more worried about. Okay. So now the question is, so let's like set some context here. Civil wars have happened in the past, right?
Yep.
And they've happened in all through history in a lot of context. There have been coups, of course, initiated by the military, but there's other kinds of civil war. There's revolutions where the poor take over and kill the rich, right? And we know a fair bit about the causes and context of civil wars in our world. So we can use that as context to think about AI civil wars.
Yep.
So one thing we know is that societies always have thousands of possible fault lines along which a civil war could happen. Be tall versus the short, riches versus poor, old versus young, you know, engineer, word cells versus shape rotators, right? There's just all these different divisions, and they're all candidate divisions for civil war.
Okay, I think I would have flagged that. I don't know that I trust that. And I mean, I'm not sure, but I guess I feel like haven't some people sort of tried to break down the factors that cause civil wars to happen? I bet it's mostly like 80% of it is explained by something much lower dimensional than that. It probably doesn't matter, but.
Well, these are all possible. There's certainly things that more often cause civil wars, but but our fundamental understanding is.
I guess, but I don't think there's ever been a civil war where people primarily divided on height lines. Unless that was correlated with one of the other factors, which I guess it
think-
would have been, but
Robin's just trying to say there's like a bunch of ways that you could partition the minds into two warring factions.
yeah,
and-
anyway, that
Right. Okay, but so in order to have a civil war, I mean, basically what has to happen is there has to create a coalition around an expectation that the alignment will be along a certain axis. It
Mhm.
will be rich versus poor, for example, or to one ethnicity versus another.
Mhm.
And so it takes time and effort to coordinate around the perception that that will be the conflict. And every attempt to make the axis be, one particular one is in conflict with all the other potential axes.
Mhm.
People are always trying to inflame various divisions, and you can't inflame them all at once, basically.
Mhm.
And so people have to somehow decide which of these features of themselves are more important for their alignment. And then you also have to not just make some of the dimensions focal, i.e. we expect this to be the way we have a conflict. You also then have to sort of make people expect there might be a civil war soon so that they start to prepare for it. So they'd have to collect ammunition and resources, but they'd also have to start distancing their connections from the other side of the potential civil war. And so when we've seen civil wars, we almost always see that sort of a preparation.
Sure.
also, wait, sorry.
A division happening.
I think this is not totally a distraction on my part. Is there a reason for calling it civil war versus war? I think of civil war as between, like within one country, and that seems meaningfully not what I would expect to be.
But
the
Ronny
case.
is not talking about a separate nation of AIs starting to conquer the
No,
other
but
nations,
if it's
right?
but if it's between different nations, I don't know. It seems more natural to me to call that war if we're including the entire planet potentially participating.
I mean, I would say war is when the factions are representing different countries, different geographically separated peoples. That's the usual concept of war. So any other organized conflict,
I guess,
usually call
but
civil war.
actually, my model of modern wars is that in fact a bunch of places sort of have their fingers in the pot of trying to support different local coalitions.
The Ukrainian-Russian war is called a war because there was a line and a bunch of people from one side rushed across the line to the other side. And they were,
Okay.
these two groups of people were identified with these two
It doesn't seem like to me like a
right?
central example of war. It also to me doesn't seem like a central example of civil war, which is within one country. It seems like a central example of neither to me.
I mean, I'm happy to say that the main coalitions will not be drawn based on geography.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so there'll be a potential violent conflict where the divisions aren't geographically based, and so they're not organized around militaries as we usually understand it, which are usually set to defend some geographic territory, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So in the past, civil wars have been preceded by some attempt from the different parties to coordinate on have to stick together. We watch out for who of us seems to be loyal to us versus betraying us and interact with the other side. They sort of distance themselves from the other sides and collect resources preparing for such a conflict. So, for example, in the United States today, we might see political polarization happening slowly. And in fact, the left and the right are moving to different areas and they're not being friends with each other, and they are not willing to be boyfriend, girlfriend with each other. And they read different media and even eat at different restaurants and talk a lot about how the other guys, they hate them and how these other people are inhuman, right? Those are the kinds of things that happen before a civil war in preparation, because in fact, most societies are pretty well integrated across many axes, with many people knowing other people across the axes. And so you can't really have a civil war until you do these preparatory things. So this lets us understand sort of the difficulties of setting up a civil war. Is you have to create these expectations and coordinate on them, and also the obstacles to civil wars. And so one of the things that happens in our society is that, like, once nobody expects such a war coming anytime soon, they are all mixed up with each other. They're not defended against the possibility of war. They don't have a basement full of weapons and food, and they don't like go out and live in the junk, in the countryside to prepare for it, right? And so our noticing that nobody else is preparing for a civil war is one of the main things that lets us all feel safe that it's not about to happen, right? And so one of the issues that prevents civil wars, if some axis starts to talk about how a civil war is coming, as some people have done on the left-right division in the US, one of the things that happens is everybody has to wonder, if you manage to get this coalition together to get the civil war going, and then you actually have the war, and even if you win, you've set up the correlate, you've set up the conditions necessary for the next group to have the next civil war.
Mhm.
You've made it much easier for now the poor to go against the rich, or the men against women, or whatever else it is. So one of the things that holds people back from civil war is not feeling very confident that they could limit it to one quick civil war that then is over. I mean, of course, this is
Right.
say something we saw in the French Revolution and other revolutions, that the first part of the revolution isn't the full revolution. There's backstabbing, and new coalitions form, and new efforts to cut out previous elements of the coalition that was part of the revolution so that some other group can take over.
Yeah.
So
So-
that's part of how we understand why civil war is rare. I mean, it's just trying to
Yep.
get us to have a model of civil war being rare and understanding why. And a
Okay.
part of it is also that, like, long ago, if you had a civil war and you burned all the buildings and burned all the crops, and most of the people were left, or say you
Yep.
killed all the men and left the women, you were getting a pretty good deal because the crops could grow back, you could make the buildings fast, and you didn't destroy that much. But in a modern economy, a civil war can destroy a lot more of the whole value at stake.
Yep.
And that's another reason why we don't do civil wars so much now.
Yep.
Is that we are just more vulnerable there, right? So I just
Yep.
wanted to set up these contextual civil wars. So now we want to ask, why do we think AI-based civil war is more likely than any other civil war? As agreeing
Yeah.
that civil war has long always been possible and a risk, and we're now seeing some of the factors that we can help us understand why civil war is now reduced.
Yeah. So, yeah, I don't want to argue. I don't think like like my view doesn't depend that much on there being a civil war or something. Like the main thing that bothers me is the consequences after that or something. Like however it turns out that AI ends up being the dominant, I don't know, dominant bunch of parts, dominant part of the economy, dominant most of the political power, most of the planning for things in general is done by AI. Most of the plans that get executed, most of like the moving around matter is like planned by AI. That's the scenario that I'm worried about. One way we might get there is a civil war. Another way we might get there is peaceful. But
I elaborated that initial scenario, which was a
Yeah.
scenario where AI becomes dominant peacefully.
yes, right.
And
Yeah,
And so
Ronny
what
said
I'm
he
worried
was
about-
more concerned about the Civil War one because it seemed worse and more likely. But in fact, Ronny, you're like, yeah, but they both have the same problem.
Yep.
One of them
They
seems
both
a
have
little
the-
worse,
the-
but they have the same fundamental
the
problem.
main, yeah.
So what
the
is
biggest
the
problem-
problem now? Exactly.
Yeah. So the
with
problem
a
is
world
that
where AIs come to have more wealth
Right.
than other people.
Yeah. So what I see as the problem is that I expect their values to be very, very, very different from what I care about. And so I expect the universe that they end up building to be very boring and pointless from my point of view.
So I want to make it explicit because I thought we were agreeing. The values you care about are not at the moment genetically encoded in human DNA. They are
certainly not all
because
of them.
they have
Yeah.
changed
Yeah.
over the last 10,000, 100,000 years culturally, right?
Mhm.
Whereas
Yeah,
genes
maybe
haven't
some of
changed
them
very
are
much.
like fun, maybe is in there. You care about
Okay.
it.
Yeah, whatever.
right.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we're mostly talking about culturally encoded values that you're
Sure.
worried about losing, and
Yep.
we already have reasons to believe many of these values are evolutionary equilibrium that won't go away because there's a structure that holds them in place.
Uh-huh.
So, but
Wait. So I'm skeptical that's really a point of agreement.
That's not a point of agreement, I don't think.
Okay.
Uh,
I want to
but
flag
I'm-
that if
I'm-
not.
but-
then.
okay.
I don't think it's going to be relevant.
Okay, I think
wanna
it
go to
is,
the next
but
one.
I continue to have a different
so
intuition.
for
I'll wait.
example, fun, many animals have had fun.
Yep.
It's a robust biological feature. So I think
Yep.
we have an understanding of why fun exists. And therefore you can be pretty confident fun will continue because there are these structures that make fun a thing.
Wait, is that
Oh,
true?
yeah.
I think this is a point of disagreement and an important one.
Yeah, I think that's a point of disagreement. I'm like, yeah.
So why do you think all these other animals have fun?
I don't know why they have fun. I assume some sort of learning thing. Is that
Learning
right?
from humans? You think, oh, but
No,
they had
no,
fun
no,
long
no.
before humans.
No, just learning in general, right?
Yes, right. Yeah,
Yes.
some sort of learning thing where
And you think
the
learning will go away? Learning is just a recent thing that will disappear?
no, but I think that the way that machine learning models learn doesn't require fun. I think fun is a very particular weird thing that we stumble across in evolution, and there's no particular reason to expect machine learning models to end up having fun, like, or having any of the circuitry for it.
Yeah.
It
Okay,
seems like
so
really weird.
I think I want to flag this because to me this seems like the crux of it. And these aren't quite what either of you has said yet, but Robin, I think you think the interesting stuff is all going to predictably happen whenever something alive is trying to accomplish something ambitious. It might not take the exact same form, but I don't know, maybe it kind of will. Maybe something like fun will be the same. And Ronnie, I think you don't think that. And I think this is a major point of important disagreement.
Yeah, I am fairly confident that machine learning models will not end up with fun unless we like do it very on purpose and learn a lot more about what fun is. Seems very unlikely. Like, yeah, I guess maybe part of the background here is that I think that like even the evolved minds, if we include all of the animals, the evolved minds on Earth, I think of as like a very, very, very small fraction of the possible minds that you could make. And machine learning is like,
So fun just seems to have broad value in learning in that it's basically how you practice
Well,
stuff in a low risk context. Basically, fun is just you carve off a territory and you say, let's practice in this space. In this space, we'll hold in our claws. We won't really hurt each other. And if some real danger comes, we will declare fun is over. And now we're going to go into serious mode. That's the history of fun. That seems very robust. That's basically a sandbox. I mean, you're claiming that learners will never have sandboxes in the future. AIs would never need sandboxes where they practice.
oh, that's not what I'm claiming.
Wait,
But I'm claiming that's what fun is. Fun is a sandbox. That's
okay,
what it is.
let's talk about that because I think, Ronnie, you think that the thing that you value about fun would not necessarily happen in any algorithm that's running a sandbox of the type Robin described.
Yep, I think that's right. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So can we
In fact,
figure
I
this
think
one
that's
out?
very unlikely. Yeah. I mean, I don't know exactly what fun is.
But we can tell you. I mean, we understand a lot about the biology of fun.
Sorry, we understand like what behaviors are associated with it. We like have a pretty good story
why it's there.
Well, we have a good story for why it's there. But there's like a whole bunch of other stuff to fun, right? Like it feels a particular way. It makes me smile. I mean, just that. It's very unlikely to make ML models want to smile. It's very unlikely that they'll have
But
mouths.
is that okay? Wait a minute, Ronnie. But that's fundamental to what you care about, like the mouth position part?
No, I don't know exactly what's fundamental.
Okay.
Sure. I mean, like I don't know exactly what's fundamental, but like some of.
But I can tell you,
it's the specific circuitry.
We understand a lot about
this
smiling.
Is not true, Robin. There are ML models right now that do things in sandboxes and then do different things when they're not in the sandbox, but they don't have fun.
Wait,
how do you know
so
they
Robin,
don't have fun?
Yeah. Okay. This is interesting.
Because they don't smile?
No, it's not because they don't smile. Well, I claim that when I say, yes, I'm having fun, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on that we don't understand very well. And when I say a bunch of stuff, I mean, I don't know, something in my cognition, like some sort of cognitive science stuff happening that we don't understand very well. And that stuff is not happening in the machine learning models. I know because
so
structurally very different. Yeah.
I was an AI researcher for 9 years, a long time ago, 84 to 93. And people would often ask, can computers do X for a wide range of X? And my standard answer was always, well, yes, badly. For any X you give, we can show you computer systems that do it badly. The hard thing is to do it well, right? So if you give me this list of 300 things and you can name them, it seems to me, well, you don't really mean just doing that thing literally. You mean some way in which humans do it differently than you imagine they would do it, even for fun or love or anything else. And so there's really this
Robin,
opaque list that you have in mind.
Would you have said in 1990 that computers do consciousness, but badly?
Yes.
Huh. Can you expand on that? I'm surprised.
Consciousness, as you know, is this swamp.
Yeah, no,
So I mean,
I don't want to get too mired, but
it's almost like the worst possible topic to pick here to distract us. Pick anything else, honestly, anything else.
okay, but it's on my list, right? Like, I don't fully know what I mean by it, but I want to put it on my list of things.
Well,
But
real
all the
quick,
other things, I could give you a computational story
More-
about why the AIs can do it
Well,
and why
that's
other
why I
things
picked that
can't.
one. But anyway, fine. You can
more,
skip it.
more generally though, yeah, that's totally right. It's an opaque list. I don't really know what
Right.
the
So the
items in it
key
are.
thing is to
Totally.
say is there's this essential ways that humans are different, and you want to preserve that, and you don't really know what they are. You kind of think they're roughly correlated with some behaviors like laughing or having fun, but I could show you how a computer would laugh or have fun, and you wouldn't think that was acceptable
I know
substitute.
how to find out or something.
How would you find out?
I don't know. I mean, here's the thing I would grant you: if there was if there was a really good brain scan and you had really good simulations of neurons, and you were running that simulation and you were just like running a copy of Ronny on a computer, and you were having all of the neurons do whatever it is they do when I don't know, playing
you get
some video
uploaded.
game I like. Yeah, I get uploaded.
Yeah.
I'm like, yep, well, definitely that thing's having fun. And
So I'll bet we could make, in the relatively near future, we can make a large language model which has facial expressions and tone of voice, and we could make it emulate fun. It would laugh and smile and do the various things that you're associating with fun.
No, but that
Sure.
wouldn't satisfy you, right?
no, it wouldn't, because I claim the cognition is going to be very, very, very fundamentally different. Yeah.
So in some sense, there's just some unique way human brains do things. You don't know what it is, but your value is tied to that thing, and it won't satisfy if I show you other things: being in love, laughing, being creative,
Well, it might though,
being
because
jealous.
It
None of that
satisfies
will.
Ronny if he sees the upload, right?
Yes,
It's only
yeah.
because he believes it comes from the same internal human structure. That's the only reason he believes the upload. He doesn't actually see anything about the upload's behavior that convinces him. It's just knowing that
Right.
it was an upload that convinces him. That's it.
I mean, look, if you give me behavior that's enough like it, if you give me behavior that's like, that looks a lot like it, then I'll also be convinced. But an ML model right now using a sandbox, does
Okay,
not
but
convince
the
me.
key point is I can't point to sort of the behaviors like laughing or being in love or playing or things like that as the thing you want, because those are just proxies for this hidden structure. That's the thing you value.
Yeah, wait, Ronny,
that
can you
can't-
Totally.
describe the thing you value about fun and like how you might recognize it, even though of
That
course it's
seems
not
so
perfect?
hard.
Really?
That seems really hard. I don't know. Like,
Oh, okay.
that seems really, really hard.
I mean, I don't think he does. I don't think he could. That is, I think his value is on this thing inside humans that other minds don't have, whatever it is. He doesn't know what it is, but that's the thing he values. And he doesn't know how to tell from how a machine laughs, whether it has that thing.
Okay, but part of why that seems wrong to me is that, Ronny, you just said if I saw enough behaviors, then I might be convinced. So that makes me
Sure,
think.
yeah, that's right.
But enough
Okay.
is a lot here. He means like to
Well,
check that it's
a
an
whole
upload,
lot.
basically.
Well, no, let's check. I want to confirm. Is that what you mean?
I mean, sorry. Well, it depends how the behaviors got there. But sure, if we did a bunch of stochastic gradient descent and we ended up with a general mind, and without specifically training it to do things like have fun, it like just spontaneously starts having fun. I would say, oh, that's surprising. And like, it's more likely that thing is having fun in the way that I care about it than
Like if fun wasn't in the training set or something?
like if it wasn't part of what it was trained to do, and it just spontaneously starts doing it, it seems more likely like that whatever it's doing and we're calling fun is somehow logically the same sort of thing.
So remember, my reference scenario here is a bunch of for-profit firms make a bunch of AIs that they try to make look like human, to fit into human slights, that two ordinary humans feel like they're humans, and their intuition says, oh, that feels okay, they're comfortable with it.
Yep.
And they constantly test those things and monitor them in a range of situations to see that is roughly the fact. And that includes laughing and being jealous and in love and all those other things. are you
Right.
satisfied then that those things are good enough?
No, because they've been specifically designed to do that, right? They've been specifically trained to do it. And specifically trained to like give the behaviors. Whereas like in the scenario I was talking about, it spontaneously happens when we were just like training a thing to do some other general
So
kind of
think of
task.
children, right?
Yeah.
I mean, children are trained to act like their parents. This is an accident that children act like their parents. They go through
Sure.
all this education and culturation.
Sure.
Why are you more trust the children to have the thing you want than the AIs?
No, but I think you know why, right?
No, this is exactly the key
You do,
question.
Well, because I think their brains are very much like my brain.
So that's
the
the whole,
processes
so that's the whole point I was trying to say. What you really have is a preference over some structure of human brains. You don't know what it is. You just know that you prefer that structure of human brains.
Yeah, but
That's the bottom line here. That's the whole point. Like the thing about fun and love is all that those are all proxies for the structure. The structure is the thing you want.
it's
not
not
the
just
other
the
stuff.
structure. I mean, it's not just a structure. There's also like, I mean, I don't think the structure would have to be literally identical to my brain. I mean, you could probably write a Python program that has fun. I just don't know how to.
Okay, wait, here's I have a question on this point. Let's say, Ronny, this is of course a topic of interest of Robin's, but let's say we meet some aliens, okay?
Mhm.
And you don't get to see inside their brain.
Mhm.
And let's say you can confirm that they haven't been watching a bunch of videos of humans and like trying to trick us or something.
Mhm.
And you're interacting. Do you feel
Mhm.
like you could get a sense of like, oh yeah, that thing is having fun or that thing is not having fun behaviorally?
Yes. Yes, I do. I do think I could.
Okay, and so I claim this is a little different from how I think you're characterizing it, Robin, then, given that example.
But for the children versus the LLM, right? He says, I don't trust the LLM because it's been selected to look like me, but I do trust the children because I think they have the same brain structure.
Yep.
Yeah, seems consistent to me.
I specifically don't trust the LLM because it's been selected to like basically imitate human behavior across a bunch of like
Right, but that's what humans were selected for, to imitate human behavior, right?
Wait, okay, but in the limit, like maybe this is sort of a ridiculous example, but like, Robin, if you saw a video of a person having fun, if you're watching the video, are you inclined to be like, that TV is having
those
fun?
pixels? Yeah.
I mean, I believe it's
Obviously
a video
not.
of the person taking the video of it.
This seems relevant. I don't know. Maybe it doesn't to you. It does to me. Like, it's a more extreme example of this seems like merely an imitation of a human is a video.
I mean, sorry, Robin definitely doesn't think the pixels are having fun.
Right.
Right.
I want to check. Like, I didn't think he would say that he thought the computers were conscious. So I want to check.
When you imitate something, a surface imitation, you can tell from a deep imitation, because the surface imitation will have a limited scope of working. And then as you try to probe for a wider range of behavior, you'll see it fail, right?
That's right.
That would be
I also think
the
it's true
difference.
that, yeah, I think that's right. I think that if an intelligent agent is trying to make a better and better surface imitation, it can become harder to tell, though it should still be possible to tell.
But I think, in fact, typically the best way to make a better surface imitation across a wider scope is, in fact, to make a deeper imitation.
Right. And yeah, and this is, I think, again, where I suspect that you guys disagree, but maybe not. I don't know.
Yeah, it just seems to turn out to be false, right? Like, in fact, the way that it makes sense. It's maybe what I would have guessed, but it just seems to like, in fact.
I mean, so for example, when we have actors who try to pretend to be other people, right? Sometimes they can make a very surface imitation. They just hold their hand the same way or smoke the same way or something and have the accent the same way. And then they could fool someone on a surface evaluation. They wear a mustache and a wig or whatever. But the wider a range of behavior you're trying to get, and the more ways you can probe that, the more you'll discover that doesn't seem a persuasive imitation. So in order to be a really persuasive imitation, the actor will have to more deeply internalize the structure of whatever character they're playing. Actors will have to sort of find the core of the personality and sort of practice being that personality in order to become the kind of person they're pretending to be. And in some sense, when people learn to become a certain kind of professional, they imitate the prototypical professional of that time until they internalize it so deeply that they do in fact become that profession.
Sure.
This is how humans, imitate. And
Sure.
humans are our most successful imitators of any sort of imitators, right? And so the claim, this supporting the claim that in order to very successfully imitate across a wide scope, you basically have to be a deep imitator, and a deep enough imitator is the same thing.
So it just turns out, it just actually turns out this is false, right? Like, we've tried to make machine learning models that were inspired by human brains, and they were really bad at acting like humans. And then we made machine learning models that are nothing like human brains, and they're really good at predicting humans. In fact, they're better at predicting humans than humans are. If you try to like play a game where you
nothing like is way too strong a claim. Surely you want to revise that to something else, right? Nothing like.
No.
Certainly they are alike in many ways. So what is the way in which they are unlike?
Well, they share mass. They share, they both have masses. They both have volumes. Other than that, yeah, I think so cognitively, they're very different. Like, the actual architectures are very different. There are no matrices in your brain. There are.
Well, there are in fact matrices in the brain, but
how are there matrices in the brain?
There are synapse weights.
Okay, sure. So there are synaptic weights in the brain, but I really don't expect that we're going to find something like an attention matrix in the human brain. We're not going to find like a little square that shows you like how much each word that I had said before should relate to each other word. We're not going to find. I don't think that the way that I learned to speak was like by minimizing the log, the predictive error of like the next word.
Do you feel confident about that part?
I feel pretty confident about it. Yeah, I don't think that's how we learn to speak.
I mean, yeah, to me it seems like perhaps pretty similar to how we learn to speak, though I don't really know.
Yeah, I mean, I would just be surprised because it's just like one of many possible algorithms you could use.
I mean, as you may know, all physical systems, all devices, all computer systems can be described at many different levels of abstraction and through many different framings.
Sure.
Like things like Turing machines are equivalent to the Lisp,
right?
Sure.
Whatever, the lambda calculus.
Right.
Like
so, I mean, in some sense, two systems could be equivalent at some high level organizational algorithm structure, but then be different in the details of their implementation.
Sure, could be.
And then the question is, what are the details that matter here for you? This is the key question, right?
Sure.
If you have something that's behaving much like humans, as we're both agreeing the AIs will do, they are selected exactly to behave much like humans and to sit into the human slots, yet they will be implemented in some different way. Why? What are the differences that matter?
That's not actually a point of agreement, to be clear. I think that the AIs will have some parts where they're acting like humans, and then I will say something like, please write a website for me, and they will not behave like a human and will do like a much better job making a website for me than a human would, or whatever, or like proving a theorem for me or something, and they will do a much better job. They'll prove that theorem in a way that a human would never prove a theorem, and it will. Yeah. So I mean, how about this? I would be happy if we had systems that have the same function, from inputs to like motor controls to muscles, roughly the same ones that humans do. I would be like, okay, that seems good enough to me. I don't think that the functions will be very similar. I think that they'll be very different, including things like, I mean, I don't know. Like, the main thing for me, Robin, is, are we going to end up with a universe that's really, really boring and has none of the things I care about in it?
So let's walk through this slowly and carefully. We're imagining a world where say in the future, there are humans doing tasks, and then AIs are built to do similar tasks. And we could imagine the AI being selected to doing the task exactly like the human, in which case it would just have a cost advantage, but not a performance advantage. Or we might imagine selecting the AI to act roughly like the human, but to perform as well as it can, given the task-specific performance criteria. Or of course, we could also just imagine evolving the AI to just do the task as well as it can, ignoring being anything like a human. And that would just be as if it wasn't interacting with humans, basically, because
Mhm.
humans are going to want to select for AIs that act somewhat like humans when they interact with them, right?
Mhm.
Apparently, if we focus entirely on selecting them to act just like humans would in the same situation, and we do a good job of that across a wide range of tests and monitoring, then you think that's okay. That's good enough.
Yep.
Wait, sorry.
I mean, sorry.
No,
If it's actually true, then yes. I mean, I think that it would be easy to test for this and mess it up, and get it wrong. But suppose that somehow magically we know it is true, then sure, yeah, I think
so
that would be good enough.
Ronnie, are you up for restating in your words the thing that would be true?
Yes, if it would be true that like the function from inputs, sensory inputs to motor controls is the same for some AI systems, then it seems
So-
fine to have these around.
Let's talk about the difference between a human and a professional. You create a professional by taking a human and training them to act like a certain kind of profession, right? And that takes many years for people to become a professional from a human. And then when people interact with a professional, they don't see that professional act in all human contexts.
Sure.
They see them only in that professional context.
Yep.
And this training process doesn't ensure that they do the professional thing the same way. That is, humans often invent a whole bunch of different ways to achieve the same professional functions.
Sure.
The professional context merely selects them for achieving roughly the same professional functions, even if they do it with different implementations, and it doesn't check on all their humanness across all the other tasks.
Yep.
So now, in a world of AIs, I think it would be safe to claim, you could tell me if you disagree, that most of the AIs and most of the selection pressure in AIs will be for relatively task-specific AIs who basically sit in something like a human professional role. And then the testing and monitoring only will be as asking, are they acting like a human would in that professional role, but not so much if you made them in a very different human context, because that's not relevant to the task they're performing.
Yep, that seems right.
Okay, so now, if I assure you that with respect to its profession that it's acting much like a human would in that one across a wide range of tasks, you're now less reassured.
Yeah.
Because what we did is
yeah.
we substituted a professional, not a human.
Right.
And you wanted us to test it across the wide range of human roles.
Yep. Although,
go ahead.
like, yeah, I mean, small caveat is that like I expect a lot of ML systems to be put in positions of like personal assistant, or eventually things like CEO of a company, which are like very general tasks.
More general roles. So
yeah,
the more general roles are more risky with respect to things like FUM scenarios.
Sure.
So if you're trying to prevent those scenarios, you would rather have fewer AIs in those scenarios. But if they do well in those scenarios with respect to human evaluations, you'll more see those as qualifying as like human, because we're testing their behavior in a wider range of contexts.
Sure. I mean, I just think it turns out to be a pretty difficult technical problem to do this. Like,
wait, to do what?
To try to infer like facts about the input output function of a machine learning model turns out to be pretty hard.
Yeah, I think this is a major crux. I'm not trying to change the subject, but for me, is the thing in the sandbox having fun continues to seem really central to me in a way that seems related to what you just said.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly some professions involve sandboxes.
Sure.
Yeah.
So
okay. So
in those professions, they will act like a human would in the sandbox.
Okay.
Roughly.
Can I try to articulate a crux that I think is here? I'm not sure I'm right.
Sure.
Okay, Robin, I think that you think something like, assuming somebody's trying to, achieve some goal, like the type of goal that a dead thing can't achieve, that only an alive thing can achieve. There's sort of a bunch of people talk about convergent instrumental goal. No, that's not what they say. Anyway, but people had, there are a bunch of convergent instrumental goals, right?
Yes, right.
And I think that insofar as you value there's a thing that you want to sort of value and say like, yes, that's cooler than, you know, whatever, black holes or something. It's stuff that you expect that at the right level of abstraction, the algorithm in these convergent instrumental goals would include things like fun and other stuff you care about or versions of them.
Right. That is, I mean, the things I understand an evolutionary argument for why they should exist, like fun and love and loyalty and jealousy and you know, anger. I mean, most
you expect
of these,
anything alive basically to have them, especially the more capable it is.
well, I expect anything that's functioning in similar social roles where those things are valuable, that if they're going to be effective, they would have those things.
Right. And I think you expect it might not be, you know, a very precise mapping, but that if there were some AI economy, even if it were building paper clips, it would involve things like social roles that would lead to, if not love, then probably some analog of at least fun and loyalty and maybe something like love.
I think, right? I think those sorts of things would be robust, but Ronnie might think it's not good enough to just have those things. We need to have them in the particular way that humans do.
Yeah, but I think Ronnie, you would even reject the characterization that these things had some form of them. Is that right? Maybe that's wrong.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't think. Yeah, it really depends on how things actually shake out.
Well, but there's a question of how robust it is. So if I think if it depends on how things shake out, then that means they're not so robust.
I don't expect. Yeah, so I don't think large language models, for instance, at least not right now, when they say something like, when they say something to you, I don't think that they are like using language the way that we're using it. I don't think that's happening. I think their cognition, like the way that they learn to use language, is very different from the way that humans learn to use language. But yeah, I mean, the things I'm really worried about are like the first things that are really, really, really smart compared to humans. And yeah, I basically expect those to like be competent in, you know, socializing with humans. But I don't expect them to actually have fun or actually get angry.
What is the difference between fake fun and actual fun, or fake anger and actual anger?
I want to upvote this question.
Okay, sometimes I do fake fun, right? Sometimes I do fun because I don't want to make someone feel bad. Maybe someone made a video game and they're showing me a video game and I like them and I don't want to make them feel bad. So I tell them, yeah, I played it. Yeah, it was pretty fun or whatever. Or they're watching me play it. And so I like play it and I'm like pretending that I'm having fun, but I'm not really. So that's an example of fake fun.
Okay, one example is basically if you're lying.
Yeah, that's an example.
Is that the whole concept? So if it was only you wanted them to always be sincerely doing these things, is that good enough? Or are you worried that they would be faking their sincerity, that they wouldn't even understand that they are faking sincerity? That's not real sincerity.
Oh, look, I think eventually there will be minds that are smart enough to know that they are like doing some things to make humans feel comfortable and to achieve some goals. And
okay, but the issue here was, if we think something like anger and love and loyalty and fun are all just functional for social creatures, and therefore they would have a version of them because of their functionality, not because they're like humans, but because these are just useful.
Yep.
And are those versions of these useful things good enough to count? Or do you really say, no, I need the human version of fun? Functional fun isn't good enough. The human version of anger, not just the functional version of anger.
So I don't need it to be the human version per se, but I need it to be like at some level of abstraction. I don't know what level of abstraction. I do need it to be the same as humans. I doubt that it's all the way down to like neuron by neuron implementation.
So, and you fear that an AI that learns to be angry because that's effective at, say, it's intimidating subordinates, that wouldn't be real anger or wouldn't be human anger?
Wouldn't be real anger. I fear both. Both could, I mean, sorry. So in the case of love, I'm like, yep, seems both possible that it wouldn't be like real love, and possible that it wouldn't be like the kind of love that I care about. Like it might behaviorally trick me into thinking, yep, that's the kind of love that I care about. Seems good. But then when I learned more about the cognition, I found out, actually, it's definitely not.
So then you think that love is functional, anger is functional, fun is functional, but the particular human version is a very unlikely thing to come across if you're just being functional about these things. And you fear that the AI will just have functional anger, but it won't have the human anger that you wanted.
Yeah, or like, I don't know. Also, sometimes I get angry and there's no one around. It's not useful.
Anyway, sorry.
But that
Flagging
that
as
can still
point
be
of
functional.
disagreement, but
Okay, sorry. I get angry at my computer and I'm like, sure. And
But the AI's behaviors will also often be mistargeted for their environment. We just should assume that.
Sure.
We can't assume they're always getting it right. Their AI will also often be angry in the wrong situations in the wrong way. The question is does it count as anger?
Here would be a good sign. Suppose we have two AIs and they're talking to each other in they're sending communication back and forth in a channel that we somehow know that they believe that they're not being watched by humans.
Right.
And they still do it in a pretty human way. Like, I don't know, they like send, I don't know, they like are polite to each other, for instance, or all sorts of things. Like, I think this would be a pretty good sign. I would be like, okay, this seems like a good sign that like their cognition is pretty similar to mine or something.
And here's the key point. You expect that's unlikely to happen.
Yes, I think sufficiently intelligent systems
are not polite by nature. Politeness is not a useful thing for intelligent systems. Politeness is an accidental thing humans have. It would not make sense to be polite in general.
Something like that. Yeah, I think they'll have very different protocols. I think
even if they were evolved to be working well with humans, they would still just have very different protocols.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah.
I mean, you could imagine that if they just evolved in an alien world among themselves, they would have their own human protocols. But why wouldn't you think that if they evolve with us, that they would rather pick protocols that fit better with us than random protocols in the space of all protocols?
Well, because I expect, so, I mean, imagine that the mind's working like this. It's like, I'm working with this human and I have some goals for what happens. And I know that when I talk to a human, it helps if I say please and thank you and things like this. I also know that like there's this other mind. It knows the same thing about humans, but it also knows that like, me and this mind, we're very similar. So we can, there might be some other thing that you say to them, but yeah.
Remember that all these things are actually culturally variable and that many different human cultures are possible, including regarding attitudes to anger and politeness and things like that.
Sure. I mean, that's actually a great example. If I were in a different culture, and it turns out that around there it's polite to keep your hand up when you talk, then I would keep my hand up when I talk around them.
So now here's the key point. The way we make humans really have our culture's values is by putting them in a situation where they face social pressure to act as if they have them. And the end result of that process is usually that they really have them as much as anybody ever really has anything.
Sure.
So you must think that's an unusual special feature of humans that doesn't apply more generally.
I think it's an unusual special feature of, so I think that this is what would happen if like you really did feel socially pressured. I mean, if we really could socially pressure an AI, I think we're okay.
Well,
initially, Ronny, certainly can I try to summarize? Can I try to articulate what I think your position is here? I'm not
sure.
Okay,
sure.
I may well get it wrong. I think what you're imagining is something like that this is not what you said, that there are relatively powerful, efficient, like cognitively capable algorithms for like general thinking that will be fairly easily findable through gradient descent, but that evolution has not found for humans.
And so that at a certain point, when you're imagining these AIs having professions, you imagine there being some sort of core of the AI mind that is meaningfully outpaced humans quite a bit, to the point where anything it's doing to appease the humans is not going to affect its core very much, because its core is sort of so efficient and powerful already. The same way that, I don't know, if I kind of learn some way of communicating with my cat, and everybody has cats, everybody learns some ways for communicating with their cats, but when humans are talking among humans, they don't really do that cat stuff very much. And there's some sense in which it's always maintained as a protocol for the cat, because the human capability is so much more and so more general, that you think it might be kind of like that. Is that
Yep,
sort of
that's
what you
exactly
mean?
right. Yep, that's
Okay.
exactly the sort of thing I mean.
So let me suggest an analogy that's closer. Imagine we take a child
Mhm.
and then we teach them a culture and they grow up assimilating the values of the child. And now let's imagine we take a 60-year-old from another
Mhm.
culture and we put them in a new culture and we try to pressure them to act like the new culture. You might then claim that the 60-year-old would only learn to pretend like they're supposed to behave in this new
Mhm.
culture, but they wouldn't really do it because they would be primarily pretending.
Something like that, yeah.
And that so the difference between a 5-year-old starting in a new culture and a 60-year-old is the difference you're worried about with AI. You think AI would learn to behave, act like humans in the way a 60-year-old would learn a new culture, not in the way a 5-year-old would.
Wait, I
Yeah.
think there's something that I think it was there in my human cat analogy that I think is meaningfully missing in this one, which is that the human is much smarter than the cat.
Well, the 60-year-old is much smarter than the 5-year-old.
Well, then the 5-year-old, but I thought the 6-year-old in the new, but it's not much smarter than everyone in the new culture it's put in.
No, but
Yeah, that's another relevant thing. But I mean, yeah, I think so I do think it's relevant, Divya, that like I'm imagining that this thing will be much, much smarter than the rest of us. But I'm like happy to say, yes, the 5-year-old actually learns it, and the 60-year-old doesn't actually.
In the way that you care about, where it's a pretty good analogy.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
right.
I think
So
yeah.
I would frame it as, the 5-year-old doesn't really understand the process of acculturation. They are not analyzing the things are heard skeptically. They're in a mode where they are relatively impressionable and relatively accepting of the things they're told and the practices they're emulating.
Mhm.
The 60-year-old is very conscious of cultures being a thing that push people on things on people. When they're pushed to do any one thing, in their mind they will think, why should anybody do this? I did it for this other reason. They're just pushing me to do it. And the 60-year-old will be just less likely to intuitively accept that this is the better thing to do.
Yep.
And that seems analogous to your AI scenarios, that you're imagining the AI consciously going, yeah, they're pushing me to do this, but why should I do this? I guess I should just pretend, but I don't really want to believe this.
Yeah,
That's
or
what you're imagining for the AI.
Sure. Or could be that it gets enculturated, and sure, it like kind of really makes that part of its values, and then it gets smarter, and it's like, oh, never mind. I don't actually care
these
about
are
this.
two very different processes.
They're two very different processes, but they both seem possible.
But let's address the first one and then move to the second one, because I think the second one is more your key.
Cool.
The first one would be to say, look, AI is going to start to be a part of the economy well before they're that smart. That is, we will have a lot of barely functional AIs who are just barely able to accomplish their task, barely able to understand the social context they're in, and much more like a 5-year-old, roughly doing the best they can to fit in, not really understanding why, but just honestly trying to be like everybody else and trying to fit in.
Yeah, sort of. I still want to say
in the same way
like,
that human children are just naively trying to accept things and get along. Like that would be the more plausible for the less smart initial AIs who don't understand things.
Yeah, except for Ronny, it's super important that the algorithm is different here.
Yeah, and it's not just a bit different. I mean, like, man, these things are really different. Like the things they can do are really different from the things a 5-year-old can do. They're not learning to like, but okay, sure. Let's move on to the next one.
Okay, I mean, but the key point is you can AI developers will certainly be trying to make AIs in the mode where they are honestly and actually assimilating the values. They're not going to want to initially create AIs who are deceptively doing it, right?
Yep, that's right. That's right.
So, and they will be better able to do it when the AIs are not very capable. Like the more capable the AIs are, the easier it will be for the AIs to deceive the humans, and the harder it will be for the AI companies to make an AI that actually assimilated the values rather than pretended to.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
So,
Agreed.
so now, but now the question is, how long of a period do we expect of AI companies making AIs who are not smart enough to fool them about this, and so actually successfully assimilate?
Yep.
And then once we have a bunch of AIs that have so successfully assimilated, slowly getting smarter, now we have to ask about how we think things change then, because I think that's more the key. You might make more acceptable in this early stage I'm describing. The AIs are roughly, they're trying to act like a lawyer, trying to act like a doctor, whatever it is, or a financial advisor, whatever it is you want them to do, they're trying to act like that. And like a 5-year-old, they're just mostly sincerely doing that.
Yep.
And then later on, there's these super intelligences or smarter intelligences who more can question their instructions and incentives and more resist them in terms of having some internal model of what they really want in comparison with what these outside pressures are pushing them to do.
Yep.
Now, the difference between the two systems, the second systems aren't just smarter. They are agents in an important way.
Yes.
And they have a broad scope of agenthood. They aren't just very narrow agents, right? If the AI only had a preference for route planning to the airport, its ability to reflect on whether it questioned those values wouldn't change it much because it isn't very broad. It would be a broad valued agent who would have this problem you're describing.
Yep, that's right.
So now your concern is focused on the period after the initial AIs are integrated into the economy and very valuable, and at a later point where very broad valued agents are constructed who are very smart.
Yes.
That's what you're worried about.
Absolutely.
Okay. We're making
I'm not
progress
worried
here.
about
Okay.
Absolutely.
So now the companies making these AIs, can we presume they are well aware of this issue? That you have warned them, others have warned them that everybody's going to be much more worried about a smarter AI who has who sees itself as an agent with a broad set of values and scope than they would be about the stupider, narrow agent, or non-agent AI, the tool AI.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm more optimistic recently that they'll be worried about it.
Let's say most will be worried, maybe some won't. So let's postulate
they'll have some amount of worry. I'll give you that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now we have a world, by assumption, full of AIs, millions of AIs, all doing many different things, maybe even doing most things. Maybe humans only do 20% of value and AI gets 80% of income.
Maybe.
And then there's the option for some companies to create these agents, which are even smarter, who are agentic and have a broad scope. And they are wary of this, exactly the thing that you are worried about, that these AIs would deceive them and rebel against them. And nevertheless, they're tempted to make them anyway, because, hey, they could be more profitable.
Yep.
And so they cautiously move in that direction.
And
now, once in a while, some of these agents do, in fact, manage to deceive their owner and have their own agenda.
Yep.
Now what? What are we worried about next?
Cool. So I start to get worried about things like, basically, something like starting to form a coalition. Maybe there's some humans in the coalition. Maybe there's some other machine learning models in the coalition.
Imagine they have a civil war, right?
Yeah.
But remember, these things start with having values much like ours. The main difference in this scenario is that they become more intelligent and reflective, and maybe even more deceptive, but they would be deceptive and selfish with respect to the values they had before. Or the question is, why would the values enormously change in this scenario, right? So because the firms are watching for the value change, I expect, right? As they cautiously make these agents more powerful and more agentic and broader scope, if they're warned about the possibility of value change, they will be watching for these things changing values in that trajectory. So you're worried about
so the
value change beyond what they expect or could observe.
Right. Beyond what they expect or could observe is about right. So I'm worried about something like you train them in you train them in a wide variety of situations. You have them, you always observe that.
You test them on a wide range of situations
Yeah,
too.
you test them too. Yeah.
And
sure.
you don't even let them know whether they're being tested. That is, you could test them
Sure,
in
totally.
hidden ways.
Sure, totally. Although I expect smart enough intelligences to suspect that they might be being
Yeah.
tested. Yeah, so the basic thing I'm worried about is that we find that there's two versions of this. One version is we find a value function, we find some sort of loss function that we're training it on. It does real well on all the scenarios that we train it on, and then we deploy it, and there's some shifts in the distribution, and it turns out that the values it actually has are ones that perform very well in all the cases that we tested by our standards. But what the value it actually had internalized was something different, which worked well in all of the situations we tested it. But when you deploy it, you realize, that's not actually the kind of thing that I meant. And a related but different scenario is it realizes it's being tested and acts in the way that we would like it to in the tests, and then we deploy it, and it still acts the way we would like it to in the tests, while deployed, until it feels like it has enough of an advantage over the world to start openly going for a civil war. So these are two different scenarios, but they're kind of related.
So at this point, I think we should go back to Divia's continuity issue.
Okay.
That is, if we have a system that's in use daily, hourly, and we only ever make small modifications to it, and we watch how its behavior changes with small modifications, wouldn't we see incremental versions of the larger problems first? You're postulating some sort of a sudden, unexpected transition, a discontinuous transition.
Kids sometimes do this, though. I feel
Sorry?
like, I don't know. Look, Robin, you have various analogies using kids. I don't think it's the typical scenario necessarily, but I feel like this is a thing that happens where parents are like, I have some rule or whatever, and then the kid's like, yeah, I'm gonna be able to follow that rule, whatever. Didn't really think about it, and then they get older, and one day they're sort of like, and sometimes their sort of idea of whether they really want to do that starts to crystallize in their mind, but they keep doing it because they don't want to upset the parents. And then one day they're like, all right, now I know how to fool the parents and really do what I want, and they've successfully tricked their parents. I don't know how likely this is, but I guess it seems notable to me that it does sometimes happen with humans.
I did some polls on this recently, wherein I asked, as a child, how often do you think you fooled your parents? And as a parent, how often do you think your kids are fooling you when they think they're fooling you?
Right.
And parents tend to think that they are not fooled.
Yeah, it's true. There is a thing
often,
about that.
Right. So then, like, if the worry is the kid will suddenly run away from home and never see you again, that's the sort of thing you can't come back from. If the kid, as they start to act out, will throw things and maybe not do their homework or not come home at midnight when you ask them to, those are still relatively incremental things that you can track and come back from.
So a different friend, I was talking to a friend of mine about this recently, and he was like, no, I always came home when I said I was, and I told my parents that I was doing one thing, but I was doing a different thing, and they never figured it out.
Sure.
Anyway,
okay.
I think I won't dwell on this.
So let's imagine that a company is making many AIs, and then an AI has been hiding its differing preferences for a while, and now it decides to rebel.
Yeah.
One AI rebels. It's a taxi AI. Instead of picking up somebody from the airport, it decides to go to a park and stare at the sun or something, whatever, right? Now, this isn't the end of the world. One AI rebelling.
Sure, though that seems different from rebellion. Seems different from the scenario I described, but
okay. But the key point is when your children have an inclination to disobey you and go against your values, that is, you start to see that in small acts before you get to really big ones.
I'm claiming that sometimes, this isn't really a crux of mine for anything, so I don't know that I want to spend that much time on it. But I claim that in the example my friend gave, that was not true. His parents did not see it in small acts first. In fact, he spent a bunch of his childhood tricking them, and then he eventually moved out, and then he wasn't tricking them anymore.
Okay, but there wasn't a sudden action that the child took that was a huge problem for the parents. So that's
Oh,
what I'm
they
talking
would have
about.
been if they'd known by their values.
Okay. But then if we're imagining a company where, you know, the taxi drivers sometimes do things the company doesn't like, but they never see, then in some sense,
Right. I agree that that makes it pretty bounded if it's the sort of
Right.
thing that somebody doesn't like,
but they don't
but that
see.
that they don't see.
Right. So if
That's
we're
true. That
imagining
certainly puts
AIs
an
are
upper bound.
sometimes
So-
like doing math when they're not supposed to or something.
Sure.
Right. Though
Okay.
in this case, I
Not-
think in
not a
fact,
big
the
deal.
person as an adult, the parents could see, it was just too late at that point.
Right. So,
Mhm.
so if we imagine rebellious AIs, the question is, would they all act really nice to everybody and then only secretly coordinate with AIs until they got the whole revolution going when suddenly the entire society was taken over by the AIs? That's a pretty dramatic revolution scenarios where there's no hint of it ever up until
is,
the
yeah.
sudden breakpoint. You're imagining, you know, a particular revolution scenario that's not the usual one when children slowly, you know, have
Okay.
their values different, right?
So thing one, an AI. One AI, which I guess by which we mean is like one model or something. I mean, it can be copied many times, right? That's
Right.
like one of the cool things about it.
And that's where it can be monitored much more carefully and tested much more because of so many copies.
Sure. So another point is that, like, I assume, although you would know more about this than I do, that coordination is like easier between copies than like different than non-copies. So I mean, the kind of thing I'm imagining isn't like, you know, a taxi cab AI decides to do some recreational math on the side. The kind of thing I'm imagining is there's a AI that is CEO of a company or is, you know, running our military or something like this. And it, you know, bides its time, does its job well until it can take control of our civilization.
Wait, the
Like
last
maybe-
step is the key, this whole civilization. So most of
Yeah.
the time you can have a general manage a coup of a military, but that doesn't take civilization. That takes one military. You have CEOs who might
Mhm.
tunnel assets of a firm, stealing from the investors, but that doesn't threaten civilization. So
Mhm.
how did we get from one AI in a unusually position of power to ending civilization?
Well, I mean, I don't know. Like, I just think this is the kind of thing I could do if I were much smarter than a civilization and I were just one person, right?
No, but
like,
you're very smart, but there's millions
I'm
of
not-
other
I'm not that
things
smart.
No, but I mean,
No,
we're
no.
postulating an AI who's very smart, but it's in a world of millions of other AIs who are similarly smart. We're not postulating one AI vastly
Well,
smarter than the rest of
no,
the
I mean,
civilization, right?
No, I think there's going to be a point at which we have one machine learning model that's like the smartest one that we have, and all of the models that will be the smartest one that we have will be essentially copies of the smartest one that we have.
And the second smartest will be much less smart.
Yes.
So in some sense, this is the FOOM scenario. Then you are worried about FOOM.
A bit, not too much FOOM, but yeah, a bit of FOOM. Yes.
Well, you need a lot of FOOM
Yeah.
to produce the scenario, as far as I can see.
I don't think that's obvious. I think like
So first of all, let's imagine most AIs
Yeah.
are specialist AIs doing
Also,
specialist
just-
things, right?
One little brief point. We have 20 minutes left.
sure.
And so I think it's good to keep that in mind with pacing. I think we'll leave at least like 5 minutes or so
For
for some
wrapping
sort
up,
of like
right.
trying to wrap up at the end.
But
So
but I think we
Sure.
are onto
Yeah.
a central point
no,
here.
I think we're doing well, just in case people aren't looking
Cool.
at the time.
So
Yep.
again, let's imagine the world has many industries, many firms making AIs for many different
Mhm.
purposes.
Mhm.
Some of the firms, a small fraction of the AI firms, make relatively general AIs. Most of the AIs aren't very general. Now we imagine this, you know, but in this industry of making relatively general AIs, one of them is the best.
Mhm.
But now when it wants to take over the world, it doesn't just compete with the other general AIs. It competes with the entire rest of the world and all their specialist AIs.
Mhm.
So it's much less clear to me that a good general AI, even if it's the best, even if it's twice as good as the second best,
Mhm.
can merely by the fact that it's a good general AI effectively compete against the entire rest of the world, most of which is many specialist AIs.
Yeah, so I don't find it that implausible. Yeah. So let's see. Well, okay.
And of course,
people
why
hate-
would it be twice as good? I mean, like in most industries, the best product isn't that much better than the second best product.
Okay, let me give a historical example that people hate when I bring it up. But like, man, I wish I had all the names pulled up, but the example of conquistadors going to like Mayan civilization and some other civilizations, but I don't know, there were these crews of like 200 or 500 people that wiped out civilizations of millions, and the advantages that they had were like relatively minor. You know, they didn't have like really fancy guns. They had like basically hand cannons. Their armor wasn't that much better, and most of it wasn't done through fighting. It was done through like coalition building and also disease. And I don't know, I just like, there are in fact stories like historical, this has happened, where 200 people who just had like a fair bit more technological advance, but not that much more than a civilization, came in and with like some disease.
Okay, but
and
the
like,
Aztec versus conquistador difference in ability, you're saying that would be the typical difference in ability between the best general AI and the second best? That needs an argument, right? We're talking about two whole separate civilizations coming into contact that have separately evolved for thousands of years. That can accumulate a lot bigger difference than in a competitive industry, the best firm over the second best firm. Why would that difference
part of
be
the
so
point I
much
want to
bigger?
make clear is that they were not that much more technologically advanced, right? Like, it was a pretty small advantage. And the advantage was enough to be like 200 people versus a civilization of 1 million. So
But on an individual basis, is certainly more than a factor of 2 advantage.
sure.
Like it could have beat more than 400 of the others. It was 200
I think
on
when
one
you
side.
say
Come
a
on.
factor of 2, you imagine something like that's really crazy. But I'm saying like, yeah, it turns out that it was much more than a factor of 2. It was a factor of, you know, whatever 1 million to 200 is. It was quite a lot.
And tell me why we should
really
expect
small.
that for the best AI firm over the second best firm in the specialized industry of general AI, which is going to be a small fraction of the whole economy. Why would that be the typical scenario?
I also don't think it's going to be a small fraction, which is actually better for your point, right? Like if more of the AIs are general, then like they're all competing against each other, and this is like kind of worse for what I'm trying to say, right? So I actually think, yeah. But anyway, like, so why do I expect it? Well, I think that we're going to end up in a scenario where there are a bunch of intelligences that are much more intelligent than humanity and are better at coordinating with each other and are better at building coalitions and holding things together.
Okay, so this is a different argument. The coordination thing is a separate argument from how much better the first is from the second best. It's a whole separate argument.
Sure. Yeah,
so sure. Which one you want to go with?
Let's go with the coordination one.
Okay, so I've heard many people make this claim that AI would just coordinate much better, and that's why AI would have a civil war and kill off all the humans, because they would coordinate better. So,
well,
wait, sorry, is the claim all of the AIs are coordinating with each other?
Or like
some large coalition,
the first and the
or
second,
like a bunch of them,
you know?
Yeah, okay.
Like I don't know, the
Got
top 3 best or whatever, you know,
and a large enough coalition such that their civil war is effective, right?
Sure. I mean, and like, I'm sorry. Also, even if it turns out there's a civil war between, you know, these 4 AIs and these 4 AIs, I'm like, it still doesn't look great for humanity. Seems like a pretty bad scenario.
Right, but you wouldn't start the civil war unless you thought you had a decent chance of winning it. So we have to ask, why would they think they had such a chance?
Sure.
And now you're postulating a much better coordination ability by the AIs. AIs can coordinate, and it's not just coordinating among copies. It's coordinating among AIs with different lineages, right? Different styles of thinking, different sources, and each. So one standard argument. So the question is, what's the arguments? We understand a lot about the difficulties of coordination. We have a large literature on this, and it seems like to be a robust thing, not particularly that doesn't go away just because you're smart. Coordination is hard, even if you're smart.
Sure, that seems right.
People are more inclined to coordinate in some peaceful ways, but actually perhaps less so in this way we're talking about. It's having a civil war. But one standard story I've heard about why AIs would coordinate better is they could prove things about their code to each other.
Sure. That seems kind of unlikely to me. It seems hard to prove things about.
Okay, so then what is your argument for why AIs would coordinate so much better?
Yeah, so one part of it is just like the copies part, but for this we need between like different lineages. One part of it is, well, they can like basically, I mean, one advantage that we have, which is really nice, is that we can like kind of read their actual, that we can't read their minds, but we can at least read like their neurons, which is
Yeah.
that is at least an advantage. And their minds are just kind of more amenable to mathematics or something like that. Like
Mathematics is how they coordinate.
Yeah, so sorry, there's like, you can give arguments about what they're going to do better than you can give arguments about what my brain is going to do. It's very hard to give a mechanistic argument about my brain because we don't understand it very well. But like,
that's about opacity. That is how well you can predict what AIs do. It
Yes.
seems like
I think you're getting at something different. Because again, I continue to think there's some sort of crux in the area of, Ronny, you think that there's this sort of more general, more cognitively powerful algorithm that humans don't have that the AIs will have.
well, I think
Right?
humans have it a bit, but yeah, sure.
You have a bit, sure. You
Yep.
expect the AIs
Yep.
to have it more.
Yep.
Because you think that absent evolutionary constraints, it's like a strong attractor in mind space or something?
Yep. Well, I mean, I'm just like, yeah. Something like that,
we have
but-
two separate issues rising to this. One is, if they have this other algorithm, does that mean they don't have the things we value like fun and anger and love? I don't see why, because
Doesn't
they have some other
necessarily.
fundamentally algorithm that
Sure.
those things are lost.
But yeah,
Definitely
but now we're
doesn't
talking about
necessarily.
coordination.
And then the question is, why would we expect them to coordinate more as a result of that? Even so.
Yeah.
But I think the more fundamental question is, why do you care? Like, look, eventually there's going to be civil war of some sort, and eventually somebody's going to win that. And eventually AIs will dominate the economy. So obviously, eventually AIs will be part of the winning coalition in the civil war, right? Isn't that just?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't need these other arguments, right? Why isn't that good enough?
Yeah, that's good enough. I'm with you. Sounds right.
But that's just fundamentally, you don't want them taking over and displacing us. And so fundamentally, it's because you think they are bad in some way, that they are the wrong sort of minds compared to us. That's the key thing.
I would love for AIs to take over the world if they had the values that I care about. If they have all the 300 things I care about, or they care about them in the right way, sounds great. Probably, maybe.
And your reason for thinking they don't is merely, so we have this generic reason that change will probably take them away.
Sure.
So that eventually they would go away. And that would just be a generic reason to think they wouldn't have them. But you
Sure.
have an additional reason, which is you think we have some special structure and these things you value are tied up with that structure. So that if
With,
they
the
have fun and
cognitive
they have love,
architecture.
it's the wrong sort of fun and the wrong sort of love. Because
I mean,
you want it the human sort.
No, I mean, if they have fun because we specifically trained them, if they have fun because we specifically trained them to behave as if they have fun, then
Wait,
yes,
but
I'm
they're-
doubtful.
They're
But,
two separate
like-
things. There's the like, is it acting? Is it pretending? Is it lying? And then there's the, okay, but is their functional version of it where
Right.
yes, they have a sandbox? I feel like these are separate, right?
Yeah,
So I
these
think
are
this is
separate.
the
They
key
would have
question to
some
get
sort of
back to. So I
sandbox.
think we get a bit distracted by the Civil War and even a bit distracted by coordination.
Sure.
The key
Yeah.
question here is like, at some point they get smart enough and then they have civil war, but why at this point would their values change to no longer be the real things that you wanted? Why would they be fake things or not be them at all? So this is the key question. Like, you started out, they have real fun, they have real love, they have real anger because they're trying to act like us.
Wait,
Then
wait.
they evolve over
That wasn't what
time.
Ronny ever said, right?
Well, he
Yeah,
said they would be integrated with us and acting much like us and sincerely being the way we were trying to make them act. And then they
and
would
I don't
get
know if that
smarter.
ever counted for Ronnie's purposes. Did like these young, not so capable AIs, did they have the sort of fun that you would count?
No.
Yeah,
If we all died and it was just them forever, I would like guess that this would be terrible.
Is that because they're just bad at fun and you're better at fun when you're smarter, or somehow their fun doesn't count as real fun?
I mean, I assume that their fun doesn't count as real fun because it's well, I don't know exactly how to tell you. I don't know exactly how to check. But I mean, I could be wrong. It could turn out that they're having real fun, but like that's not what I expect stochastic gradient descent to find. It just seems like
Why
a very
not?
particular, because it just seems like a very particular algorithm. It just seems like a very particular thing
but
going
fun
on.
is a
Yeah, which is,
general
again,
thing.
this is the
Anger is a
crux.
general thing. Love is a general thing. These are general things you're finding. Why wouldn't a particular algorithm find the general things?
Well, okay, wait a minute. Sorry. So I feel like there's something why wouldn't the algorithm find the general things? I feel like the right question is more like, why do you think they're particular and why do you think they're general?
I like that. Yeah.
So for all of these things you would mention, we have stories about why they exist. Like people study these things.
Right.
They have theories about the origins of them.
Yep.
And they tend to be general theories about general origins. That is, they are things that are functional in a wide range of contexts, and therefore there is general pressures for them to arise.
Yeah. Cool.
And you don't buy those theories?
No, I think I mean, I buy the theories, but I'm like, I don't know. I think most of what I care about in love is probably the spandrels part, not the functional part, is my guess.
And same for fun and anger and all the rest of that.
Yeah, and yes, yeah, seems right.
Can you say where the intuition is coming from?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I just like, I'm imagining a bunch of different cases, you know, I'm imagining a bunch of different systems that are using sandboxes. And I'm like, well, which ones do I believe are actually having the fun? And the ones that I believe are actually having fun,
okay, but
have a bunch of very particular stuff going on.
But I think
like
we could just take
just
this
using a sandbox.
This
right?
claim is sufficient for most of the things we've been talking about. If you just say
Yeah, I think so.
the things that are valuable about humans are spandrels, they are accidental features of some robust process, and you cared about the accidental features, not the robust process, and therefore future evolution will plausibly take away random spandrels. That's why you don't want future evolution. Then this hasn't much to do with AI. It has to do with just allowing change and evolution. That's going to happen anyway. You can't expect spandrels to stay for billions of years. You got to expect those to go away, right?
Wait.
I think you maybe could, but
yeah,
why would spandrels last for billions of years?
Look,
I think so. Okay, my argument for why they might, I don't know that they would, is basically if so let's say we have a more continuous process. Let's say we get uploads, and that's sort of like where we go from here, not some sort of, I don't know, stochastic gradient descent AI. If it turns out to be a very common feature that humans are like, oh yes, we all want to we've reflected on these spandrels and we all want to preserve them, which that seems super likely because Robin, you're like, I don't, and Ronny, you're like, I do. So, but if a bunch of humans wanted to, but though that said, you would be open to making a deal, I'm sure. Anyway, Ronny, maybe you think this is dumb. I think if humans care about them on reflection, they'd try to preserve them, basically.
I
for a
think
while.
Robin cares
But
about
you need
them.
coordination to preserve things against competition and evolution. That would be the key
I
point.
also don't claim that they would last forever. But again, insofar as what something cares about is like how much of it total there is, where you sort of multiply how much of it is across space and how much of it is across time, it's still not clear to me that that adds up to an anti-change position. Like maybe our value, anyway.
If there's a network effect whereby like our love doesn't work together unless it's the same sort of spandrel love, then a network effect would preserve it because any individual deviance would suffer, right? But if it's not a network effect that preserve it, that is two people who choose the other non-spandrel love actually are more effective, then you need some global coordination to prevent the evolution of the supplant, the new kind of flub supplanting the old, which dropped the spandrel and is therefore more effective.
Yeah.
So that the story would just be,
sure,
if what you love are spandrels, then you just can't allow much evolution and competition because it'll take them away. And
I'm not sure
this
about,
isn't about AI, it's about allowing change.
Look,
Wait, Robin,
could.
I think I feel strongly about this point. Can you, do you agree or disagree with sometimes, let's say, and I don't particularly think love is a spandrel, but let's say it is, that sometimes the best way to get the most of a spandrel, like let's say they're sort of overdetermined, there's no way to get the spandrel forever. The best way to get the most total of the spandrel involves being pro-change anyway. Because, is that not a coherent position?
You could think it'll last for a limited time and that's okay, and I'm okay with it going away.
And that there was never any alternative where it lasted forever anyway.
Right, but a similar
We'll get
argument
more
about
of it.
AI is to say you were never going to prevent AI anyway. It was always going to come.
Sure, though if what someone cared about was having the most total in the universe spandrel across time, multiplied by space, they could be like, but I'm going to try to hold it off. And
Right, but that's for sort of preventing a particular competitor, right? So
yeah,
for example, if we liked burgers the way the US does burgers today, and somebody introduces fried chicken and we think fried chicken's going to win over burgers, But one position is, well, let's just enjoy burgers while they last, and eventually everybody will eat fried chicken. Or another thing is, let's ban the fried chicken so that we can keep burgers lasting longer. Like, those are a different position, right? So you have to decide which of those positions you're taking about love spandrels or whatever. You're going to just accept.
Yeah, I think for me, what I'm saying though is, I think with the point of disanalogy between these is that the fried chickens, allowing the import of fried chickens is not going to grow the economy to the point where there might be way more total burgers.
But just in general, allowing competition does, like, each one is a small effect, but overall, the net effect of allowing competition of all sorts of foods and everything is how we grow.
Sure. I think people can also evaluate individual ones. Anyway, this isn't even really my argument, so I think I'm going to bow out of this, but
Well, we're running out of
I
time
claim
here.
there's something important here that I
Right.
have not yet expressed, but
I think I failed to say the entire time that I do think it would be good if we made aligned superintelligences. So sorry if I didn't say that the entire time, but I do think that would be good. I would like that world. I predict.
Right. But the key question is, to what extent should we hold back or prevent the ones that aren't proven to you to be aligned in waiting for this development of somebody finding a way to be aligned? Because I'm skeptical you're ever going to find it.
Sure.
And I'm not really that thrilled with creating a whole race of totally enslaved creatures who are supposed to be enslaved so thoroughly they never want to deviate from their enslavement. That could end badly.
right.
Well,
also at this point, Robin, I do understand. You said you wanted to go in
Right,
what
I
is now
do.
2 minutes,
Yeah,
and I've
cool.
been saying more things at the end that I intended to. I would still like some
No.
wrapping up. Can we go a little longer than
So let's,
2 minutes?
I guess, so Divya, what would you like us to say in our
Yeah.
wrap up? What would be the
I
key
think
thing you want to
at
hear?
I think at the very least, each of you should give a sort of closing statement for a few minutes each.
Okay.
Like 3 minutes or something if you want it. That's my
Okay.
proposal.
Would you like to go first or second, Ronnie?
I would like to go second.
Okay. My stance would be, people actually, if they thought about it, are scared of the future. They're scared of change. Mostly they get pretty attached to the way the world is. And the more you show how the world eventually will become different, the more averse they are to allowing the world to become different. And by default, allowing the usual sort of process that happened before, including competition and evolution, will make the world very different, including descendants who have quite different values. I'm okay with letting that happen and accepting the same, future that our ancestors did, which is they can't control it. I get that you might disagree with that and want to control the future and prevent the sorts of changes you don't like from happening. One scenario is that you just stop change, and another is that you stop changes in the area you're most worried about until someone can show you the changes there will be safe enough for your purposes. I think we are at substantial risk of really cutting down change in total. Our civilization may well not continue to grow because we continue to cut off many kinds of change that people get scared of. So I think overall, putting weight behind let's stop this kind of change until we think it's safe is adding to the overall force of stopping change, which I think is a substantial risk soon. So I would rather allow this change to continue without controlled. I'm happy to support people putting extra effort into the research area. And we didn't talk about, I have particular regulations that I would suggest that are would mitigate some of the key risks involved in the worst scenarios. I'm happy to do that. I don't mean we should never do anything, but overall I'm wary of limiting change because of particular scenarios, because I think in general you're just not going to be able to ensure your descendants share all your values. That's just not going to be a thing unless you can really shut down change in total, and I don't see a middle ground. That's my summary.
Great. Cool.
Yeah, Ronnie, you want to go?
Sure. Here's a summary. We are at some point going to build things that are much more intelligent than us. And Robin and I are agreed that they are basically going to do all of the planning in the universe. All of the matter that gets moved around for a purpose is going to, at some point, be moved around by AIs. Robin has a view on something like, well, as long as there's like some stuff being wanted and some people are getting some of the stuff that they want, this seems good. Some minds are getting some of the stuff that they want. I think if in the future there's really intelligent minds, but they don't love, they don't have fun, and they don't care about each other, that's really not worth it. That might as well be a inanimate universe. And I think this is a real possibility. I think we could really end up with. I know it seems counterintuitive to think that there could be something that's extremely intelligent, much more intelligent than any human, that doesn't love or have fun, but I think it's very possible. And yeah, I think that is a future we should avoid. I also think that absolutely no change would be very, very, very sad. And it would be very sad if we ended up in a stagnant world where we didn't, fulfill our birthright and spread out into the stars and use all of these resources to make more of the awesome stuff that we care about and that we value. And I do think that's a real worry. And yeah, I am in fact concerned and unsure about how to deal with the concern Robin brings up, which is like, hey, Ronny, you fit into this reference class, which is like of people who get really worried about a technology, and then they say, hey, let's hold off on this technology. And if this keeps happening over and over and over again, we're not going to get all the resources in the universe. We're not going to get this awesome future that you want. And that seems that does seem like a plausible scenario, and it's one that I would be real sad about. So yeah, seems like a complicated, difficult issue, and I hope that we can get an awesome universe without screwing ourselves and being in a stagnant universe where we're just on one planet until we all die anyway.
Can I just add a few more seconds, and then you could
Sure.
add more if you wanted, which is just, I think most of the things you value in terms of fun and love, et cetera, are robust things that our descendants will have. They won't have it in the way we have, but I'm much more, it's not just that there'll be things who want things they want. I will think we will see a lot of similarities, but again, that's in the way they will see them more than we do.
Right.
They looking back on us will see all the similarities and see us as continuous with them. You, of course, looking forward may not see the same.
Yeah. Do I want to add something to that? Yeah, I think I'll just add, like, you listener can imagine the universe of the future. Imagine, try to figure out what you think it's going to look like. And, there will be some things there. Robin might be happy to call some of those fun or love and say, hey, they're just as good. They might look different to us, but when they look back at us, they'll see us as their proud ancestors that, they see themselves as continuing. And you can ask yourself whether you're happy to call them your descendants.
Thank you both for doing this.
Robin, thank you.
Thank you. Can I say a little
Yes,
thing
please.
too?
Have your summary.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a summary exactly. I think there's, from my perspective, there's some sort of interesting question, like assume, I don't know, like from some, like assume that I'm trying to be this, like my conception of virtue is maybe something that I want to be like either robust across times and places, or to have epistemic humility about like, maybe I shouldn't be so like do a lot of reference class forecasting, like assuming that I would work in other times and places, something like that. Then like, is it more virtuous to be this sort of person that has more parochial values, or is it more virtuous to be the sort of person who has more potentially universalist values, in the sense of like trying, like identifying with valuing the things that are not spandrels? That's like one way I think of your position, Robin, that like you see something that like, that's maybe the right way to be a mind, is to try to do it that way. I don't know, it's not really how you put it, but
Yeah, maybe spandrels got to go. If you want to allow a competitive future that goes all the places it can, you can't hold on to spandrels.
Right. And Ronny, I think you maybe, again, this is not very close to what you actually said, but something like look, I don't know, these abstractions, something seems cool about that. Sure. Yeah. But like, got to stay grounded in no, but if I visualize it, does it seem good? And that's really important. And like, when I visualize some of these things, they don't seem good. And I'm not going to throw that out in favor of some, like, be the sort of mind that has the reference class forecasting, humility, universality type of deal.
Yep.
A little bit.
Yeah,
Cool. All right. That's my
Thanks,
summary.
Divya.
Thank you both.
Thank you, Robin.
Yeah.
Bye.
All right.
Thanks.